Supremacy Games. Chapter 976-1000. Chapter 976 Refusing Confrontation. Felix knew that he could use the dragon's pride and his clan's reputation against him, but he wasn't that much of a hypocrite. He recognized that if he was placed in the same tough spot and was desperate to win, he would most definitely do the same. Thus, he refused to preach what he didn't practice. "Hand it over," Prince Arantus ordered while extending his hand. "You already shown that you have given up on your face." Princess Anastasia sneered, "I won't hand you anything unless we signed a contract on it." "Fine by me." Knowing that Prince Domino must be rushing over here with his teammates made Prince Arantus agree to anything just to hasten the exchange. Princess Anastasia wrote a short contract that enforced him to hand over the hostages first. "I have no issues with that," Prince Arantus said, "but I want to add a new term that forces you to wait an hour before chasing us." "You're dreaming." Princess Anastasia snickered, "You will be given 10 seconds just like me." "That's non-negotiable." "I say if it's non-negotiable or not," Prince Arantus said as he tightened his grip on Chemd's neck. "Understood. You have 1 minute." Felix took over command after noticing that Princess Anastasia was losing her boldness at his threat. "Dogs should know their PLA. Enough of your crap." Felix eyed him coldly. "You have 1 minute, take it or let's drop this act and fight already." If Prince Arantus was interested in fighting, he would have done it the moment those two appeared before him. "The other dog is fast approaching with his team. I am not sure that I will walk out of my fight with this bastard in one piece and in time." Prince Arantus might be proud but he wasn't delusional. He knew that Felix was a force to be reckoned with. If he had to fight him, he would do it only when he was sure that Prince Domino was far away from them. Hence, it was much better to just secure the ancestral wine jar and leave in their topmost forms to defend it. "Don't bother using those two as your leverage before me." Felix confessed indifferently, "I couldn't care less if they died right this instant." "But she does. She already did her duty as a captain by coming here." Felix interrupted him to avoid affecting Princess Anastasia. "If you still kill them, no one will give her shit for it." "Cunning bastard." Prince Arantus' expression got twisted briefly before being restored to normal. He knew that Felix had him by the throat by giving him an ultimatum. Fight or agree to his condition. Although the public was won by him earlier, he would lose it in a heartbeat if he kept pushing for negotiation while an actual fight was on the table. As dragons, they favor fights more than those petty schemes even if they could understand them. "Let's move." In the end, Prince Arantus agreed to Felix's condition, knowing that he couldn't waste any more time on this. After they signed the contract, Cursor threw Chemd and Tando at them, forcing them to act fast and catch them. "Looks like their souls have suffered intensely for them to stay unconscious this long without many physical injuries." Asna reasoned as she eyed those two's condition. Felix agreed with her as he had tasted the green flame's effect on the soul personally. Whoosh! Princess Anastasia threw the ancestral wine jar as well with a reluctant expression. She would be lying if she said that meeting the ancestor didn't pique her interest. Unfortunately, she could only want Prince Arantus and Cursor to fly with it as far as possible from them. "Don't worry, I will get it back again," Felix promised while preparing at least 15 railgun rings in a straight direction. Due to his never-ending spamming of the railgun rings for the past 6 days, it acted as great training for his mastery over them. Now, he felt like he could push the boundaries and attempt a 15 rings speed boost. "Though, I can't take you with me," Felix said. "You take care of those two and keep providing me intel about that idiot's location." "Will do." Princess Anastasia didn't even try to argue with him, knowing that she would merely hold him back. "Captain, 1 minute is too short." Cursor complained, "That human will catch up to us in no time. There are no other alternatives." Prince Arantus said, "At least, this way he will chase after us alone, giving us more leeway to handle him while flying." "I see." Prince Arantus was playing for the long game. Now that he had his hand on the ancestral wine jar, nothing else mattered but to keep it on him for the next 20 hours or so. Meanwhile, thousands of kilometers away, Prince Domino could be seen picking up speed in direction of Prince Arantis' next destination. Because he had the exact location of Prince Arantis, it was much more efficient to predict his course and intercept him than chase him from behind. Naturally, to be efficient, he had to leave his teammates behind. Get it done, son. Clan head Igos said indifferently, if you can't even beat those two boffins in a game setting, you can forget about our investment in you to defeat the Elder Dragon. I will make it happen. Prince Domino assured with frigid eyes. Prince Domino wasn't putting Felix second most of the time without a reason. This ceremony meant everything to him. The level of importance it carried in his case couldn't be compared to the other three princes or even Felix. That's because his goal in life was to become the next Elder Dragon. But, he knew that it wouldn't be possible without his clan's heavy investment in him to boost his strength. This level of investment was possible only by the four clans as it relied heavily on bloodline treasures. No one but them and the Elder Dragon had the quantity possible that he needed. 3, 2, 1. The instant 1 minute passed, Felix disappeared through the railgun rings, leaving behind him a chaotic windy hurricane and a thunderous explosion. This is too fast for me. Felix shouted internally with a panicky voice after realizing that his quick reflexes weren't able to match up with his current monstrous speed. In other words, he was traveling blindly and could easily smash through a mountain before he could even react to it. Not wanting to risk his life over nothing, Felix slowed down his speed until he was finally able to see properly. The moment he did so, he spotted Prince Arantis and Cursor tens of kilometers ahead of him. The viewers were absolutely awed as they didn't expect that Felix would bridge a minute gap in less than 2 seconds. How the hell did he get here so fast? Okay, this is getting a bit horrifying. Prince Arantis and Cursor reacted even more strongly after they checked behind him and saw Felix. They knew that he would catch up to them sooner or later, but no way in 2 freaking seconds. Maybe, I should have given you more time. Felix taunted the moment he had gotten close to them. Whoosh! Whoosh! Prince Arantis and Cursor responded by firing flaming projectiles at him, hoping to merely slow him down. They did succeed as Felix was forced to focus on evading the projectiles. They didn't just fire a burst and stopped but kept releasing them continuously. This made it impossible for Felix to counterattack. To break through their pressure, Felix had to expand on the distance between them. Unfortunately, their external manipulation range reached at least 3 kilometers, meaning that he had to stay outside of it to escape their pressure. To make matters worse, they weren't stopping to comfort him. This was the first time Felix had fought someone with a vast external manipulation range, who wasn't interested in direct confrontation. As long as they aren't stopping, you aren't going to catch them. Asna commentated. I can see that. Felix nodded with a frown. Felix knew that it would be difficult for him to hit them from 2 kilometers while they were flying at their top speed and on high alert. By the time he set up his railgun rings and manifest his abilities, they would have already crossed tens of kilometers away. As for fighting them at close range, Felix wasn't that confident to deal with them both while he had already exposed most of his trump cards. If you had a similar external manipulation range, you wouldn't be this struggling. Thor said. Felix couldn't retort against that. If any of his elements could be controlled from kilometers, he would be using them to block those attacks the moment they were launched. In addition, even counterattack from the least expected directions. Should I force my way in? Don't you dare! Asna cursed, I don't want to have my soul burnt again. Asna might have a high soul pain tolerance, but it didn't mean that she loved it. Felix forcing himself was definitely going to get him torched a few times by the green flames. I guess I can only exhaust them elementally. Felix decided to bait them to keep firing projectiles until they couldn't handle it anymore. It was a boring and slow strategy that might take hours, but it was better than nothing. Chapter 977 A Three-Way Final Battle L. For the next 2 hours, Felix had been doing nothing but waste Prince Arantis and Cursor's elemental energy. He did so by approaching them rapidly before retreating as fast as he came the moment they activate their projectiles. He kept repeating such a simple and obvious strategy, but Prince Arantis could only fall for it every time. After all, the only other alternative was engaging in combat with Felix. "Just let me have him," Cursor assured. "I am confident that I can buy you at least 10 hours by fighting him." Although Cursor had seen his teammates' horrible ending against Felix, he wasn't too terrified of him. He knew that as long as he wasn't rash and focused more on his defense, Felix wouldn't be able to kill him as easily as his teammates. "It's too early." Prince Arantis rejected his proposal. "Don't forget we still have the entire black team on our tail. I can't deal with them alone." In Prince Arantis' eyes, Felix was harmless if they never stopped to confront him. So, there was no point in wasting too much of their resources on him. As for their elemental energy, they were constantly recovering it by absorbing peak-grade fire energy stones. They might not be recovering everything, but he was confident that their energy pool could buy them 30 hours at minimum. After 2 more hours went by, Felix started to realize that he was pouring water into the sand. "I need to think of something else." He knitted his eyebrows. Felix started squeezing his brain to find out a method to force them into confronting him. Soon, he figured out that he could go past them and try to crash into them by using his railgun rings. Alas, the moment he started his plan, Prince Arantis and Cursor changed their direction. This killed off his new strategy instantly. "I need help." In the end, Felix accepted the fact that he wasn't going to pull this off on his own. After spending a few moments contemplating, he figured out the only solution to this dilemma. "How far is Prince Domino?" Felix asked Princess Anastasia. 1,000 kilometers away or so." "Good." Felix swiftly kicked off his plan by launching gemstone projectiles at those two, forcing them to evade them. At the same time, he was pushing closer, making them retaliate with their projectiles. Felix dodged them easily as always without stopping his constant assault. Although Prince Arantis and Cursor weren't getting hit by them, they were still showing irritated expressions. "He is slowing us down," Cursor said. "I know," Prince Arantis replied while narrowing his eyes at Felix. He didn't know what he was planning with his useless attacks, but he knew for certain that the black team was benefiting from this. He was just informed by his father that Prince Domino was closing the gap much faster than anticipated. Now that their speed was taken a hit, he recognized that it would be impossible to not get caught by Prince Domino before the ceremony ends. As he expected, Prince Domino took merely 30 minutes to finally appear in their line of view. The instant Prince Domino reached them, he didn't bother to say a single word. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. He manifested thousands of flaming black weapons before launching them at Prince Arantis primarily. Unlike Felix's projectiles, he was capable of controlling them manually from a distance, forcing Prince Arantis to go an extra mile in evading and blocking them. This naturally slowed down his speed significantly, making Felix and Prince Domino penetrate his external manipulation without suffering from his counterattack. As expected, he got it done right away. Felix smiled wryly after his scheme came to fruition. He wasn't happy one bit that he needed to rely on his opponent to save his ass. Alas, drastic times required drastic measures. "It's your turn. Buy me time." Meanwhile, Prince Arantis ordered Cursor swiftly after he realized that he would be forced to a halt under a few more attacks by Prince Domino. "I will try my best." Cursor gulped a mouthful at the notion of trying to hold down those two monsters before him. Sadly, he couldn't disobey the captain's orders. "Take this." Cursor manifested a quick flame orb within his throat before releasing it behind him. The instant it was about to exit his external range, he blew it up manually in mid-air. Felix and Prince Domino noticed the flame orb before it exploded, allowing them to exit the blast zone in one piece. However, this caused them to get pushed away, helping Prince Arantis put some distance between them. Good shit. Keep spamming them. Prince Arantis praised after spotting the stellar results. Having nothing to lose, Cursor did as he was told and continued pressuring Felix and Prince Domino with his flame orbs. Because he prioritized quickness and quantity over quality, he was capable of firing them akin to a machine gun. This made it close to impossible to stay behind Prince Arantis' tail. I doubt he can last for more than an hour going like this. Clan head Igos commentated, not too worried about such a strategy. True. Clan head Kirsoon agreed. Weak or strong flame orbs, all of them require a hefty sum of flames to be manifested. With Cursor's 3 flame orbs per 30 seconds pace, he would be out much sooner than anyone anticipate. Felix and Prince Domino had figured this out as well, making them force Cursor to never stop releasing the flame orbs unless he wanted to get killed. Captain! You need to get out of here the moment I am close to running out. Cursor yelled. I am already prepared. Prince Arantis replied with a focused deadly stare. He considered it as a win if Cursor managed to delay his inevitable fight with those two by another hour. Honestly, he truly hoped that one of them would attempt to get rid of Cursor when he exhausted his energy. It was a villainous thought, but he wasn't bothered by it at this moment. The only thing in his eyes was the ancestral wine jar. As expected, Cursor had stopped creating flame orbs after 50 minutes of non-stop thunderous explosions. Now, he resembled a beaten starving dog, who was unable to even stay on a flight properly. It's time. The instant Prince Arantis noticed this, he set his wings, arms, legs, and even his tail in concentrated green flames, making them resemble jet launchers. Whoosh! Before Felix and Prince Domino could react, he took off into the horizon at an unprecedented speed, reaching at least 17 Mach. What a waste of effort! Prince Domino sneered and used the same technique, enhancing his speed even better than Prince Arantis. He is actually daring to rely on speed after he saw mine. Felix chuckled as he manifested only 13 rings this time. The instant he went through them, he left Prince Domino to eat his dust and reached Prince Arantis in a split second. It didn't take long before Prince Domino appeared on the other side of Prince Arantis, putting him in the middle. Clingy bastards! Prince Arantis cursed hatefully as he glanced sideways at them. Don't make it hard for yourself and just hand over the ancestral wine jar. Prince Domino said calmly, you already did well enough for your level. *CKU. I would rather throw the ancestral wine jar than hand it over. Prince Arantis threatened. Then do it. Felix smirked faintly, confident that he would be able to catch it first. Damn it! Prince Arantis understood that if Felix ever caught the ancestral wine jar, it would be a game over for them. There wasn't much time left before the end of the ceremony and he was too tired to chase after Felix. How about this? Let's have a fair contest over the ancestral wine jar. A 3-way battle and the last survivor will keep the ancestral wine jar. Prince Arantis suggested before they rained down on him with abilities. Prince Arantis knew that this was his best bet to secure the wine jar since he was all alone compared to those two. The fact that they were both faster than him made it impossible to consider keeping hold of the ancestral wine jar until the last moment. Not interested. Likewise. Alas, neither Felix nor Prince Domino bothered to consider his suggestion. They would rather not limit themselves to such rules when they could easily fight off right now for the ancestral wine jar. Mother ****, then fight for it. Prince Arantis cursed as he hurled the ancestral wine jar as hard as he could underneath him. Whoosh! Whoosh! Almost at the same time, Felix and Prince Domino switched their direction to the ground and flew after the ancestral wine jar. Because Felix couldn't manifest the railgun rings while on the flight, Prince Domino had an edge over him. Still, Felix remained in the race due to adapting and utilizing a single railgun ring in intervals to boost his speed instead of creating them all at once. I will get it. It's mine. Both Felix and Prince Domino had their eyes reflecting nothing but the ancestral wine jar and the mountains below them, not paying attention to Prince Arantis. This was going to cost them heavily. You asked for this. Prince Arantis eyed them coldly as he opened his mouth widely, showcasing a giant dark green flame orb getting compressed over and over again. It was so sinister that the viewers felt chills course on their spine at the thought of the aftermath of such a deadly flame orb. Prince Arantis finally had enough and decided to ignore the dimensional pocket integrity. Chapter 978, A Three-Way Battle LL. He dares. Clan head Igos yelled with a suppressed furious tone. Order him to stop right this instant. Clan head Kirsoon shouted at the green clan head. He is allowed to use everything in his pocket. Clan head Azastirth replied calmly as he watched his son fire a highly condensed green flame orb at a mountain below him. As for Felix and Prince Domino, they were too engaged in their chase of the ancestral wine jar to look behind them. Got it. In the end, Prince Domino was the one to reach the ancestral wine jar and hold it tens of meters above the ground. Just as Felix was going to assault him with his battleaxe, his instincts finally screamed at him to get the fuck away from here. Felix didn't even need to look above him to spot the source of danger as the flame orb had already traveled past his face. Oh no! Utterly horrified, Felix's felt his blood run cold at the sight of the green flame orb landing on the mountain's summit. His mind went completely blank for a second before his survival instincts took over command, forcing him into manifesting the quickest possible defense. Unfortunately, he wasn't given even a good second before the flame orb went off. After a blinding flash of light and a booming explosion that traveled half the dimensional pocket, neither Felix nor Prince Domino was seen again. That's because their nanodrones were taken out instantly by the explosion, causing their stream screens to turn black. The viewers were left in a state of shock and disbelief at the black image on those screens, having a strong feeling that those two didn't make it out of the explosion in one piece. Who could blame them? They had witnessed the horrific reach of the explosion through Prince Arantis' stream, as he had flown as high as possible before the explosion occurred. This should teach them a good fucking lesson. Prince Arantis smiled coldly as he stared at the tragic aftermath of the explosion. The mountain's chain was completely gone while the surrounding area had been torched black. When the dragons saw the gruesome level of destruction, all of them felt a wave of raging anger burning in their chests. Unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. Clan head Kirsoon snapped. His reaction represented the other three head clans and the rest of the dragons. Prince Arantis had destroyed tens of kilometers worth of resources in the dimensional pocket. A level of destruction that was deemed as simply villainous and blasphemous to their sacred grounds. Although the dimensional pocket always restore its environment after each cycle, the dragons knew that the ruins below ground were finite. Prince Arantis' explosion had left a 1 kilometer deep crater, which signified a high chance of erasing a ruined site. He didn't break the rules. Clan head Azastirth defended his son calmly. If you are still dissatisfied, you can take it up to the Elder Dragon. You foolish bastard! You just opened the Pandora box in this cycle. Clan head Igos said coldly, not bothering to make a complaint to the Elder Dragon. He understood that he wouldn't even spare him a single word since Prince Arantis truly didn't break any official rule. As for clan head Kirsoon, he stopped wasting his time with clan head Azastirth and requested his daughter to check on Felix's well-being. We don't know what happened, but I am pretty sure he didn't leave the explosion zone in time. That shameless green lizard is really pushing my buttons. Princess Anastasia cursed hatefully while speeding towards the blast zone with her teammates. The dragon's lair should be fine, right? Tando commentated, such explosions can't hurt him while he has void domain. Let's hope so. Princess Anastasia wished. All of them were still ignorant about Felix's void domain replacement. While the White Clan team was searching for Felix, Prince Arantis was looking for the ancestral wine jar inside the crater. That shithead must have lost possession of it during the explosion. Prince Arantis thought as he scanned around him with an irritated expression. He knew that 3 seconds had already gone by, which meant that the ancestral wine jar would start torturing them with his endless teleportation. He wasn't too pleased with that since he had no team and no time for such games. He couldn't even rely on his infrared vision since the heat produced from the explosion was still prevailing in the area. "Cursor, get your ass over here and help him." Whoosh! Before he could finish his sentence, he was smashed in the back by a blitzing flaming black spear, making him wince in pain after his scales started to corrode and decay. Whoosh whoosh! When he heard the same noise from behind, Prince Arantus swiftly erected a barrier made out of green flames, causing the upcoming spears to merge with it. Sacred flames could only be handled with other sacred flames. "You are one tough asshole." Prince Arantus insulted with an irked expression after he turned around and saw the source of the attacks. It was none other than Prince Domino. When the viewers saw his condition throughout Prince Arantus' stream, they felt goosebumps course on their skin. Prince Domino might have survived such a destructive explosion, but he didn't come out of it in one piece as he resembled a half-eaten corpse. Yet, he was still holding into the ancestral wine jar. "At least, you made yourself useful." Prince Arantus' eyes brightened up after spotting the wine jar. Prince Arantus felt not an ounce of threat from Prince Domino due to his severe condition. "Come get it then," Prince Domino said with a serene tone, like he wasn't missing his left arm, half his wing, and giant portions of his flesh. Although his tone was peaceful, his eyes were nothing but that, they were consumed in black flames, making him resemble the Grim Reaper. Those flames had hidden his murderous infuriated eyes, making Prince Arantus have no idea what he was walking into. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, Prince Arantus appeared before Prince Domino and started raining on him with explosive claw strikes, aiming at his weaknesses. With Prince Domino's current state, he sure was full of them. PS. Blood kept spewing from Prince Domino's wounds as he was incapable of blocking all of Prince Arantus' attacks. To make matters worse, all of those attacks were accompanied by green flames, which resulted in Prince Domino's soul getting torched. Why didn't he stay hidden until he recovered? What a foolish move to fight in such condition. He is missing an arm and holding the wine jar with the other. What the hell is his endgame? You won't know greatness even if it stared at you right in the eyes. Clan head Ego sneered inwardly after seeing everyone's reaction to his son's decision. Instead of scolding him for making such a poor decision, he supported it wholeheartedly. That's because he figured out that his son was using Prince Arantus to punish himself for falling for such a simple bait. If he was truly perfect, he wouldn't have gotten hit by the explosion. For Prince Domino, who sought perfection, such a poor sense of judgment was punishable behavior. Not yet, not yet. Prince Domino murmured inwardly as he toughened through his soul getting burned and flesh being sliced. He just did his absolute best to defend his vitals and let Prince Arantus have his way with him. If Prince Arantus ever heard his thoughts, he would honestly halt his attacks in despair and pure fear. No one was freaky enough to punish themselves after surviving a nuke. Speaking about freaks. Deep underneath a golden river, a big crystallized black plate could be seen situated on the riverbed. Unique weird-looking fish were swimming around it, curious about its origin. Just as some fish attempted to get close, the crystallized white plate was moved, scaring them away. What was exposed underneath it was a naked scorched humanoid figure with his entire skin melted. The burn damage was so bad that it was close to impossible to recognize the figure's face. However, the instant he forced his bloodshot eyes open, there was no need to guess about his identity. You wanna play with nukes? Then, let's play with nukes. For the first time in a long while, Felix's rage level had reached its limit. Prince Arantus and the rest of the dragons were going to have a taste of it. Chapter 979, A Three-Way Battle LLL. Felix never entertained the idea of using destructive abilities on the dimensional pocket to be respectful of the dragons. But now? He removed such thoughts from his mind. Felix gritted his teeth and pushed himself up with great difficulty, feeling like his entire body had been burnt into a crisp. If it wasn't for the crystallized white adamantine shield and his void suit blocking most of the force, he would have honestly been blown to pieces already. though, those two defensive measures had saved him from the force and mitigated most of the heat. Fortunately for him, he had a peak resistance to fire, allowing him to survive the explosion with 4th-degree burn marks. After Felix swam outside of the river, he sat down in a meditation position and started releasing his healing poison inducement. In a few moments, his melted skin had been restored to its lustrous smooth appearance. If your gemstone manipulation was any better, you would have survived the explosion without a single scratch. Carbuncle shared casually. I know. Felix nodded in agreement. Because his internal gemstone manipulation was still in the early stages, Felix was too slow in manifesting his abilities. If it wasn't for so, he would create a thick barrier from the white adamantine that protected him from everything. Alas, he merely managed to create a crystallized plate before the explosion went off. I must have been sent tens of kilometers away. Felix looked around him for a couple of seconds after realizing that he was in a different region. Felix, are you okay? Do you hear me? Suddenly, Felix received messages from Princess Anastasia. I am fine. Felix answered while taking off towards the nearest mountainous chain, not caring that he was going in the opposite direction of the ancestral wine jar. I thought we lost you. Not yet. Tell me your location, we are coming for you. No, Felix replied with narrowed eyes, it's going to get messy and it's best that you stay as far as possible from me. Before Princess Anastasia could respond, Felix muted the message's notification for the next 3 minutes. Then, he sped up towards the mountains. The moment he reached the summit of the biggest mountain on the chain, he stood on top of it and extended his arms upward. Thunderstorm. He murmured. Thick gloomy clouds started gathering about the summit, turning the day into night. Faint crackling noises and flashes of light emerged within those clouds as they kept stacking against each other. Rumble rumble. Before long, thick lightning bolts started raining down on the mountainous chain, breaking boulders and creating long fissures on their surfaces. At the start, there were merely tens of lightning bolts, but they kept on growing in numbers until it was close to impossible to see anything but lightning bolts. As the targeted mountain was getting a real beatdown, Felix started enlarging his size until he was close to 100 meters. Boom boom. Then, he tightened his fists and began punching the mountain as hard as he could. Because of the thunderstorm, the mountain's surface was already cracked and weakened, allowing Felix's behemoth punches to deal serious damage to it. If the nanodrone wasn't destroyed, the viewers would have been left absolutely baffled by Felix's antics. Prince Domino and Prince Arantus were brawling over the ancestral wine jar while he was here fooling around. Felix knew exactly what he was doing. Rumble. Rumble. With one final deadly punch, the mountain had finally given in and crumbled to many pieces. Felix cancelled his thunderstorm while dusting his humongous hands. Are you sure about this? Asna warned, those lizards won't take it calmly. They started it. Felix replied calmly, I am just returning the favor. The moment he finished his sentence, Felix pointed his enormous root gemstone at the destroyed mountain and activated the crystallization beam. It was as red as the previous time, but the size of the beam was many times bigger. That's normal considering that the root gemstone was a mutation that was part of his body. In other words, if he increased his size, it would also have its size increased, just like his wings. After the beam touched the destroyed mountain, it started to crystallize, turning rocks and boulders into argidite gemstones. In less than a minute, millions of those rocks and boulders had all been transformed. Time for step 4. Felix extended his palms and turned on one of his passives, gemstone fusion. The crystallized boulders and stones started to move towards each other like they were being pulled with a magnet. Immediately after 2 or more crystallized stones touch, they fuse into a singular bigger gemstone. This kept on happening over and over again until all of the crystallized stones were fused into a single towering spherical gemstone. It was almost as big as the nearby mountains. Step 5, Gemstone Concentration. Felix ordered. The giant spherical gemstone began shrinking in size while turning darker in shade bit by bit. Before long, it reached a beach ball's size. Still, it kept shrinking and shrinking until it reached the size of a marble. As for its color, red was barely noticeable anymore, turning it into a sinister dark color. Felix held it between his fingers for a second before beaming into his AP bracelet. Then, he unmuted Princess Anastasia and requested the current ancestral wine jar location. They still haven't moved from their previous location. Thanks. Felix beamed a new nanodrone and took off immediately towards the ancestral wine jar. If it wasn't for the rules insisting that he always had to have a nanodrone following him, Felix would have never beamed a new one. The moment the stream screen turned back on and displayed Felix flying without a single wound on him, the viewers lost it. Some of his fans cheered, some sighed in relief, and some didn't even react, having an unshakable trust in Felix's cockroach ability to survive through everything. He really can't be killed. Sylvia chuckled. I am certain that Felix has 9 lives like a cat. Olivia said with a tone filled with conviction. Ha, my boy survived even worse. Grandfather Robert snickered as he watched the stream with his company's executives. Only those who knew Felix from the very beginning and saw the amount of shit he went through had such a firm belief in him. For him to appear this far, he must have not used his void domain. Clan head Kirsoon was relieved by Felix's survival, but he was distressed by his inability to utilize the void domain. He wasn't the only one to guess this much, as the other 3 clan heads figured it out instantly. While clan head Igos kept the news to himself due to the rules, Green clan head Azastirth didn't hesitate to warn his son about Felix. He was already too deep to care anymore. The other asshole also survived. Prince Arantis was irritated more than ever. Alas, he was getting pressured heavily by Prince Domino to bother spending too much time thinking about Felix. Cling cling. Both of them were trading blows like their lives depended on it. Prince Domino's wounds had already healed miraculously due to his uncanny rejuvenation while angered. This forced Prince Arantis to channel his inner madness to keep up with Prince Domino's enhancement. The viewers could see that if it wasn't for Prince Domino's unwillingness to drop the ancestral wine jar, he would have already taught Prince Arantis a tough lesson. There they are. Felix smiled coldly as he eyed them from afar, not wanting to get spotted by them. Now, how do I deliver the Argodite marble from here while making sure it doesn't go off before it reaches them? This was quite a big hurdle in Felix's tactic, since the marble would end up exploding midway due to the high friction with the wind. If he got close to them and used it, he would get caught in the blast zone as well. Felix might not know the exact distance of the explosion, and he didn't want to figure it out while inside of it. How about encasing it inside a bullet made out of gemstone? Felix pondered, though, how can I launch it? Chapter 980 Electrical Sniper Railgun. Author note, I am so sorry for the delay. There was an urgent family medical emergency that I had to attend. This is yesterday chapter, and I will be releasing the other 2 chapters today as well. P.S. Thanks for everyone's kind will on my wisdom tooth extraction, it went great, nervous face. The first idea that came to Felix was utilizing railgun rings. But, he knew that they wouldn't work on a bullet that was barely 3 centimeters long. That's because he had to channel the electromagnetism to the center of each railgun ring. Felix wouldn't be able to do so for something this small throughout all the rings. What if I minimized it? Felix raised an eyebrow as he envisioned a much smaller, more compact railgun rings. It will work. Thor supported his idea, knowing that Felix didn't have too much time on his hands to explore all potential ideas. Let's get to it. Without further ado, Felix closed his eyes and started calculating the requirement for the minimized version of the railgun rings to pull them off. With his quick thinking, he managed to come out with a semi-perfect product. Knowing that he didn't have much leisure time, Felix swiftly followed through with his creation. He extended his arm in direction of the Prince Domino and Prince Arantis. Then, he manifested 10 smaller electrical rings above his arm. They were barely 10 centimeters wide, making the viewers raise their eyebrows in intrigue. Felix beamed the sinister concentrated dark red marble and swiftly encased it in a long pink pointy bullet that resembled a sniper's bullet. He had chosen to use Coltnal gemstone as the base for the bullet since it was the lightest of them all. This meant that the instant the bullet hit either prince's, it would break apart and release the concentrated marble in the open. To increase his accuracy, Felix made a gun gesture with his extended hand and leaned closer to his shoulder with one eye closed shut and the other squinting at his targets. Naturally, he zoomed with his quantum vision until both of them were literally in his face. Mind you, Felix was at least 50 kilometers away from them, making him outside their vision. I only have one shot. Felix took a deep breath to pacify his emotions. Let's make it count. Felix would be lying if he said that he wasn't slightly nervous. After all, he had never tested this technique before, and he didn't have many chances to fail before making it right. The moment he fired a blank shot to test out his new technique, clan head Azastirth would warn his son about it. If Prince Arantis showed signs of alert, Prince Domino would follow along. Thus, Felix made sure to calculate the distance, the wind, and his target's movements to predict where would his bullet end. This is my gift for you. Felix mewed as he squinted at Prince Arantis' bloody furious face. The instant Felix saw that those two had broken off their engagement to take a quick breather, he didn't hesitate to push the crystallized bullet into the first railgun ring. The bullet got encased by millions of electrical tongues before it was released to the next railgun ring. The same happened over and over again until the pink bullet disappeared out of sight, leaving behind an thunderous explosion, resembling a sniper rifle taking a shot. In less than a second, Felix noticed Prince Arantis' attempt to reflexively avoid the bullet but to no avail as it had landed directly on his chest. Both Prince Arantis and Prince Domino turned to look in Felix's direction in utter confusion after the pink bullet ended up breaking into many fragments without leaving a single scratch behind. Felix ignored them and eyed the concentrated marble that was starting to shine tens of meters above their heads. Gotcha! Simultaneously, both princes lifted their heads after their danger instincts tingled like crazy. The instant they noticed the shimmering dark marble, they darted as far as possible from it without even understanding what it was. Alas! They were still too close. Boom! The mountains shook, the rivers overflowed, the leaves on trees were pulled off, the birds flew away in a hectic manner, and the ground trembled akin to having millions of bulls charging on it. All of this was merely the reaction of faraway places after the residue of the explosion's shockwave reached them. As for those in the blast zone, no one knew what happened as the instant a flash of blinding light appeared, both princes' stream screens turned black. This was more than enough to silence everyone, making the holy grounds resemble a deserted graveyard at night. The clan heads, the officials, the ambassadors of other races, the royal dragons and red dragons all shared a similar expression across the board. Utter disbelief. As for the stream chat, no one was typing anything but bots. Even Felix's already numbed fans had their fingers frozen on their holographic keyboard with their eyes widened and mouth agape. Just like synchronized divers, everyone turned their heads reflexively towards Felix's stream screen that was showing a towering mushroom cloud, touching the ceiling of the sky. It was absolutely breathtaking, yet, no one was in the right mind to appreciate its beauty besides Felix and his tenants. What has just happened? Clan head Azastirth mumbled while his enlarged slits were affixed on the mushroom cloud, feeling like he was being pranked. Everyone else ought to feel the same as they had just watched a nuke-like explosion being cast by Felix from 50 kilometers. All resulted from a tiny bullet. If the contestants weren't banned from using mass-destructive weapons, everyone would have assumed that Felix had cheated. Ha ha ha. That's what I am talking about. Abruptly, clan head Kirsoon clapped his hands while laughing loudly, making his voice echo throughout the entire holy grounds. This was enough to wake up everyone from their momentarily daze and join him in creating a rowdy atmosphere. How? Holy! Don't tell me both princes were killed. Is he even a human anymore? When even the dragons were reacting like, there was no point in mentioning the stream chat. While everyone was losing their minds, Felix was speeding towards the mushroom cloud. Felix! Are you okay? Worried, Princess Anastasia contacted him after seeing the explosion. Never been better. Felix replied with a faint smirk. Was that you? When Princess Anastasia heard so, she had a strong feeling that Felix had a hand in the explosion. Yes. Princess Anastasia was left speechless as well. Talk to you later. I still haven't finished my business. When Felix arrived at the site, he used his X-ray vision to search for any survivors. As expected, no one was spotted around the crater. Still, Felix didn't let down his guard and continued his search. Before long, he managed to spot shining bones a few kilometers away from the crater. As he followed them, the amount and size started getting bigger. In a few moments, Felix reached the source of the bones. There you are. It was none other than Prince Arantis' corpse. Or, at least what remained of it. I like you better this way, silent and dead. Felix smiled coldly as he leaned closer to Prince Arantis' ruined face. The upper half was gone while the bottom half was utterly indistinguishable, making it impossible to identify him. If it wasn't for a few green scales lying around him and the grey gemstone underneath his damaged skull, no one would guess that he was a prince. Felix simply returned the favor. Arantis. Clan head Azastirth was deflated back in his seat after recognizing his son. He closed his eyes and massaged his eyelids silently, not showing an ounce of anger, hatred, or even grief. He just disappeared in his chair. The other three clan heads didn't even tell him sorry for his loss or tried to comfort him. In their eyes, Prince Arantis died an honorable death during a battle, which warranted celebration instead of sympathy. Chapter 981 Getting Trapped. Meanwhile, Felix fished out the grey royal gemstone. He examined it for a few seconds before beaming it in his AP bracelet, not caring that everyone was seeing him. Since Prince Arantis had his AP bracelet completely deleted by the explosion, Felix could only take his royal gemstone as his rightful victory prize. In his eyes, he could trade it with the Green Clan for other goodies if they weren't too irked by killing their prince. Now, let's look for the other. Felix restarted his search with a serious expression, knowing that there was quite a big chance that Prince Domino had survived. In his eyes, if he managed to survive Prince Arantis' flame orb, he could do the same with his own. Good one, child, looks like humans have truly developed beyond my expectations. Before Felix moved even a few meters, he heard the voice of Ancestor Ymir in his mind. When he looked around, he saw a wine jar floating next to his head. I am unworthy of such high praise. Felix bowed his head respectfully, not attempting to catch the ancestral wine jar. No need for such formalities. Ancestor Ymir said with a kind tone, let me borrow you for a few days. I am quite intrigued by your unique strength. Hey! But... No buts. Ancestor Ymir said causally, the other child of the Black Clan is barely alive, and the rest haven't done anything to earn my time. Upon hearing so, Felix kept his mouth shut, knowing that Ancestor Ymir was also including Princess Anastasia in the mix. Can I inform my teammates? Felix asked. He had no intentions of pursuing Ancestor Ymir to meet with Princess Anastasia since he didn't want to risk losing the ceremony. After all, if no one met with the ancestor, then the winner would be decided by the amount of bloodline treasures gathered. There is no need. Ancestor Ymir replied, I have already kicked everyone out and closed the dimensional pocket. Felix could only stare at the ancestral wine jar speechlessly. Close the dimensional pocket? Felix didn't even think that was possible since the Ancestor Ymir was clearly a fire elementalist. He was already baffled by Ancestor Ymir's teleportation ability. In Felix's eyes, no matter how many attributed sacred flames he could command, they had nothing to do with space element. Is he being for real? Yes. Lady Sphinx disclosed, if this is a self-created dimensional pocket, and he has infused his consciousness in it, he can do as he pleased within it. Felix was still confused by her explanation as he never heard of such a thing before. So, he attempted to test out Ancestor Ymir's claims on his own. Queen, am I still connected to the UVR? This is Mia, the offline backup AI. Unfortunately, you are not connected to the network at the moment. I strongly advise that you connect to the UVR in the next 2 hours, otherwise, you are at risk of voiding most of your contracts that are reinforced by Queen AI. This was more than enough proof that the gate was closed. Losing connection to the UVR implied that the signal tower was cut off after the dimensional gate got closed. Felix didn't even bother to check on Anastasia and his teammates since he couldn't message them without signal. Erase that dumb look on your face and follow me. Ancestor Ymir said calmly while flying north. Okay. Felix could only chase after him while being slightly nervous. Who could blame him? He was trapped inside a dimensional pocket all alone and without access to the network. Anything could happen to him. Don't worry too much. Lady Sphinx smiled, let us handle him. All right. Knowing that the meeting usually get held within the consciousness space, Felix's nervousness disappeared immediately. How could he be afraid when he had 5 primogenitors and a Unigen settled in his mind? Anyone daring to enter his consciousness space was bound to bow his head, even Ancestor Ymir. While Felix was following Ancestor Ymir to an unknown destination, the holy grounds had erupted in complete chaos. Everyone got kicked out of the dimensional pocket and landed at the bottom of the altar at the same time. The Red Clan team were expressing their frustration as they had their search for bloodline treasures interrupted while there were still a few hours left. The Green Clan team had only Cursor left, who looked to be more relieved by just getting out of there in one piece. Prince Domino was rushed to get healed by his teammates while he was unconscious. His state was simply too miserable to look at, making anyone doubt how was he still breathing. Last but not least, the White Clan team were searching for Felix amidst the confusion after their messages failed to get delivered to him. Why did the ancestor kicked everyone out so soon? Clan head Bimid frowned as he watched the chaotic scene below him. He has seen enough. Clan head Kirsoon smirked faintly, the 2 biggest contestant for the wine jar has gotten eliminated, there is no point in dragging the game for more hours. You shouldn't be smiling. Clan head Igos eyed him with a displeased expression, he must have decided to meet with the human, this isn't going to look good for us royal dragons. Look good. Clan head Kirsoon sneered, the Dragon Slayer has won his battles fair and square. If our ancestor has found him worthy to meet him, then we have no right to think otherwise. He is right. Clan head Bimid nodded. Clan head Igos couldn't argue about this any further, knowing that anything he said would be considered as opposing the ancestor. Just as the situation was getting more chaotic and confusing, Elder Dragon ordered indifferently, silence. His voice resounded throughout every dragon's ears, making them freeze in their places and swallow whatever they were about to say. In a brief moment, the holy grounds returned to its peacefulness as everyone lowered their heads and waited for Elder Dragon to speak. This cycle's winner is the White Clan. Elder Dragon announced emotionlessly, the human will exit the dimensional pocket shortly. After those 2 announcements, Elder Dragon stood up from his throne and took off into the sky as sudden as he appeared. Everyone kept their eyes on him until his shadow completely disappeared in the horizon. So much had happened in this cycle. Yet, he didn't show a single ounce of emotion for any of them. Even the fact that Felix was about to meet the ancestor hadn't affected him one bit. In the Elder Dragon's eyes, everything that happened was a mere children's squabble. He didn't care if even a rat ended up meeting the ancestor since nothing was going to impact him or his position. After he left, the holy ground returned to its rowdiness, however, it was more organized this time. Good thing I was saved the embarrassment of getting rejected. Princess Anastasia smiled bitterly as she eyed the closed-shut dimensional gate. The moment she realized that Felix was still inside, she knew that the ancestor was never going to agree meeting her. As for the other royal dragons? None of them dared to speak ill about the ancestors' decision to meet Felix. They had seen him approach Felix on his own before he kicked everyone out. "Let's wait for Felix," Princess Anastasia said while sitting under the altar. Tando and Kemd nodded and sat next to her, knowing that Felix should get kicked out of the dimensional pocket in a minute or so. All royal dragons knew that time run differently when the dimensional pocket get closed. Lady Sphinx's guess was correct as the time moves based on this rate 1 day/100 days. In other words, 1 minute on the outside would translate to hours, which was the most common duration everyone had been given by the ancestor. So, everyone waited for Felix's exit. Alas! 1 minute gone by, then 2 minutes, then 5 minutes, before long, an entire 30 minutes gone by and there was no sight of Felix. Okay, this is getting alarming. Clan head Kirsoon stood up with a deep frown, knowing that not a single royal dragon had spent an entire 30 minutes inside the dimensional pocket. Chapter 982. This is taking a wild turn. What's up with them? Olivia titled her head in confusion after seeing that the royal dragons were all reacting weirdly. Who knows? Sylvia and the rest of the Earthling team were also left confused. Unlike the royal dragons, the red dragons and the rest of the viewers had absolutely no idea that Felix should have spent more than 7 days inside the dimensional pocket by now. In their eyes, Felix was inside for merely 30 minutes, which was nothing. Send everyone home. Clan head Kirsoon ordered his subordinates after seeing that the royal dragons' discussion was getting louder and louder. They wanted to avoid exposing the time difference in the dimensional pocket since there was some nasty history revolving around it. All the royal dragons were absolutely banned from speaking about it. Should we turn off the stream as well? Clan head Bimid suggested with a serious tone. No need. Clan head Igos said, it will make the situation even more peculiar than it is. The royal and red dragons getting escorted outside the holy grounds wasn't too peculiar since the ceremony had indeed ended. Though, shutting off the stream before Felix had exited the dimensional pocket was a different story since he had trillions of fans. As expected, the viewers waited patiently for Felix's exit, not knowing that the clan heads were getting agitated with each minute that goes by. Before long an entire hour passed. The hell is going on? Clan head Igos said with a suppressed tone. Did Ancestor liked the Dragon Slayer to the point he decided to keep him for half a month? If this was the truth, then it was quite a resounding slap to the entire dragon race. He probably kept him to experiment on him or something. Clan head Azistirth said calmly, that human strength is just too uncanny even for us. He hadn't forgotten how Felix had nuked his son by a mere bullet. As long as Felix didn't come out to clarify it for him, it would always irritate him. Enough speculations. Clan head Kirsoon sat back on his chair with a concerned expression. We can only hope that he doesn't spend more hours inside. Unbeknownst to everyone, Felix was going to spend much more time than that. 1 hour earlier, Felix had been led to a new ruins site underneath a grey hill. This ruins site looked quite the same as the previous ruins Felix was at. Though, the yellow buildings weren't as destroyed. Come sit here. Ancestor Ymir said as he teleported above a giant dragon statue. Felix did as he was told and sat in a mediation posture on the head. You can enter your consciousness space. All right. Without questions asked, Felix accessed his consciousness space, joining the rest of his tenants. They were all chilling in one giant table while being served by Mistress Candace. Meanwhile, the ancestral wine jar teleported above Felix's hand and remained there. The closed-shut lid was opened slowly and released a somewhat visible mist that went through Felix's ears. In a few moments, Lady Sphinx and the others all glanced at the side after spotting a grey mist getting turned into a small dragonoid figure with a hunched back. Ymir. Lady Sphinx raised an eyebrow in surprise after seeing Ancestor's Ymir's shocking appearance. He looked like an old humanoid grey lizard with merely a few days to live. His skin was all shriveled and wrinkly, his mouth had not a single tooth on it, his eyes were closed tightly, exposing tiny muddled slits. As for his scales, most of them fell apart, exposing his shriveled skin. The ones remaining were barely hanging around. One look at him would make anyone doubt if they were truly in the presence of the great ancestral dragon instead of just a random dragon on the verge of death from old age. Hey? Lady Sphinx. Surprised and confused as well, Ancestor Ymir's eyes widened slightly as he stared at Lady Sphinx's beautiful face. He naturally had seen the others, but he didn't recognize them immediately since they were all gone by the time he was born. Only Lady Sphinx had lived through his era and had a couple of dealings with him. What happened to you? Lady Sphinx inquired with a deep frown. Why are you choosing to appear like this in your spiritual form? If Ancestor Ymir had shown himself like this in his physical form, everyone would have assumed that he was simply getting too old. But in a spiritual form? That's different. He was able to look as he pleased, which made it even weirder for one of the greatest dragons to choose this fragile and weak appearance instead of a noble one. Excuse me, I did not expect to find a crowd. Ancestor Ymir chuckled kindly as he walked towards the table. May I sit? He requested politely. Yes, of course. I apologize for raining down on you with questions right from the start. Lady Sphinx offered him a seat next to her. Mistress Candace appeared behind him and helped him get into his seat, joining everyone on their round table. Ancestor Ymir, let me introduce my masters. Felix didn't want to make Ancestor Ymir feel like an outsider. This is Master Thor, he is the primogenitor of lightning. Felix introduced while extending his palm at Thor. Oh ho! I guessed as much. Ancestor Ymir smiled kindly like an old man while saying, I felt an intense aura of lightning from you. Before Felix could introduce the others, Ancestor Ymir turned to Hormungandr and added, you must be the primogenitor of poison, the Ragnarok bringer. Then, he turned to Fenrir and guessed his identity as well before moving on to Carbuncle, getting it right too. You are. However, the moment he reached Asna, he wasn't able to identify her. Asna, a Unigen, and this idiot's girlfriend. Asna introduced politely while pointing at Felix with a head nod. A Unigen. Ancestor Ymir's entire demeanor had changed the moment he heard the term Unigen. His face went from a kind grandpa to being absolutely horrified like he had just heard the boogeyman story. Under everyone's stunned eyes, he started to shiver and shake while avoiding eye contact with Asna. They finally sent one to finish the job, they finally sent one to finish the job, they finally sent one to finish the job. Ancestor Ymir kept mumbling while rocking back and forth in his chair akin to a traumatized child, who had seen his parents get killed before him. What the hell is going on? Am I that scary? Asna asked everyone telepathically with a dismayed expression. No one knew how to respond to her question as they were just as baffled and dazed as her. The great ancestor of the dragons and a being with a peak strength equal to primogenitors was shaking in pure fear before them. No one would believe it if they hadn't seen it personally. Quick on her feet as always, Lady Sphinx massaged Ancestor Ymir's back gently while speaking to him with a comforting tone. Ymir, take a deep breath, no one is coming for you, you are safe here under my protection. No one is coming for you. Just like a child being comforted, Ancestor Ymir stopped shaking bit by bit until he was finally able to get hold of himself. He started taking deep breaths instead of mumbling gibberish. Even when it looked like he was finally calm, he refused to lift his head and stare at Asna. This is taking a wild turn. Felix thought to himself as he watched such a puzzling situation unfold before him. Chapter 983 No one to blame but myself, no one. I apologize for showing you such an unsightly appearance. Ancestor Ymir bowed his head after he finally regained control over his emotions. If you are uncomfortable with me being here, I can leave. Asna proposed. She had no idea why Ancestor Ymir was scared of her, and she believed that they could find out more about his reaction without her presence. Seeing that Ancestor Ymir flinch after hearing her voice, Asna teleported back to her house, not wanting to make it difficult for him. The moment she left, Ancestor Ymir lifted his head, showing an anguished expression. I don't know about your experience with Unigens to leave you broken like this, but Asna is the last Unigen you need to worry about. Felix defended Asna with a serious expression. He is right. Lady Sphinx clarified, Asna is newly born Unigen and without her true guardian powers. A newly born Unigen. Ancestor Ymir found it a bit difficult to believe. But, he knew that Lady Sphinx was the last one to lie to him as she valued truth more than anyone in this universe. It's best to show you. Lady Sphinx placed 2 fingers on his forehead and displayed the tragic history of Asna. After watching it thoroughly, Ancestor Ymir mewed with a dazed expression, they have punished her too. They? Fenrir frowned, don't tell me you had a bone with them? Them. Lady Sphinx and the rest of the primogenitors all showed stern expressions as they waited for Ancestor Ymir's response. When they heard him mumble that they were after him, they thought that he had offended a Unigen and invoked his wrath on him, however, it looked to be much deeper and dangerous than that. Ancestor Ymir ignored them and swiftly teleported before Asna's house. He knelt down and apologized with a remorseful tone, I am truly regretful of the way I treated you. I hope you can forgive me. Asna blinked in front of him and hastily lifted him with a flustered expression. Please stand up, elder, it's not that serious. Thank you, thank you. When Ancestor Ymir heard so, he acted like he was relieved by the emperor himself. Let's go back to the table. Asna held his hand to comfort him and helped him sit in his chair. After they were seated, he kept looking at her like he had found his kindred soul instead of feeling afraid. Mind sharing with us your story? Lady Sphinx sighed, the last time I saw you, you were standing tall, bold, proud, stern, and emitting an authoritative pressure rivaling that of primogenitors. Unlike the others, Lady Sphinx felt surreal and overwhelmed by Ancestor Ymir's current behavior and appearance. She had seen him in his glory days, standing at the top of the universe with them. Before him, the elder dragon would resemble a child imitating a natural-born emperor. Yet, this natural-born emperor was kneeling, apologizing, quivering in fear, and showing major signs of weakness. She was truly baffled on how could someone make such a 180-degree switch. Just what happened to you? I flew too close to the sun and had my wings burnt off. Ancestor Ymir smiled bitterly as he reminisced. Everyone remained silent, waiting patiently for him to recall his memories. Hey, at that time, everyone thought that dragons were the perfect race. Ancestor Ymir snickered, that's a mere joke. We were the most imperfect creatures in the universe and been given the greatest curse of them all. Unchecked pride. Ancestor Ymir eyed Lady Sphinx and continued on, I believe you still recall how much pride I had in myself and strength during my glory days. What you don't know is that my pride made it impossible for me to sleep at night while knowing that my universal social status is that of a mortal even though my strength has already reached the realm of gods like you. Lady Sphinx nodded in understanding. Although Ancestor Ymir had caught up to primogenitor's strength, he was still considered as a mortal. Sure, he could live for 100 million years or even more, but he didn't possess true immortality like the primogenitors, Unigens, and other superior beings. As for vampires' immortality or such, they were merely cheating the system by utilizing their gifts instead of being truly born with it. So, I went to seek what's rightfully mine. Ancestor Ymir stated. You really went there on your own, dot. Shocked, Thor eyed him like he was staring at a madman. Everyone else had the same flabbergasted looks but Felix and Mistress Candace. Thinking about it now, I also see myself as a maniac for even thinking of such thing. But, at that time, my eyes were blinded by my towering pride, making me see it as nothing but the right thing to do. Ancestor Ymir chuckled in derision. How was it? Their resting grounds? Lady Sphinx asked with an intrigued look. I don't know, I was blocked at the gate and no one was there to entertain my request. Ancestor Ymir shared. Thought so. Lady Sphinx sighed. How did you offend them if you were blocked at the gate like the rest of us? Carbuncle wondered with a serious expression. During his journey to revive his wife, he also visited those beings in hopes of helping him. Unfortunately, he returned empty-handed without giving a single word. I let my pride and anger take the best of me. When no one replied to my requests of being bestowed immortality, I attempted to force my way inside. Ancestor Ymir closed his eyes as he narrated the most regretful moment in his life. I used everything I have on their gate and ended up not even scratching it. When I finally gave up, I turned around and left after cursing them. The more the primogenitors in Asna heard, the faster their heartbeats gotten. They couldn't even imagine how was Ancestor Ymir was still here after doing all of that. I know. Why wasn't I erased? When Ancestor Ymir saw their looks, he figured what they were thinking about. Believe me, I would have rather gotten killed right there than live long enough to see the consequences of my idiotic actions. Ancestor Ymir said with a pained voice. They acted on your race. Mistress Candace mewed. Felix also realized that the first dragon city's destruction and the death of most ancient dragons was related to those beings. If only they sent an army or their dogs to handle my race, I would have never been this broken. Ancestor Ymir sighed, but, they sent the Paragon of Sins. Paragon of Sins? Felix's eyes widened in shock. He never expected to hear the Paragon of Sins to be responsible over almost the extinction of the dragon race. In his eyes, the guardians of laws shouldn't be dealing with matters outside their duties. This happened 100 million years or so. Lady Sphinx frowned. Shouldn't the Paragon of Sins be in a slumber? The creation of void creatures and the destruction they brought to the universe was ongoing for a very, very long while. I don't know whether he was asleep or not. But, I am certain that he had a hand in my race's fall. Ancestor Ymir said with a tone filled with conviction. How so? When I returned to the first dragon city, I saw my descendants slaughtering each other with eyes filled with wrath. Ancestor Ymir narrated, at the start, I assumed that maybe an internal war started between the 9 clans, but, the moment I entered my city to break off their fights, I was assaulted with prideful and angry thoughts. They completely consumed my mind, telling me that I am bigger than this and I shouldn't dirty my hands with children fights. On the opposite coin, my wrathful thoughts kept pressuring me to join the killing to vent off my humiliation from being denied access to the resting grounds. All of you knows that only the Paragon of Sins can affect our desires and manifest them in the most horrible ways. Lady Sphinx and the others nodded with a serious expression. They didn't doubt his claims anymore that it wasn't the Paragon of Sins. As the law's guardian of void and sins, the Paragon of Sins was one of the most terrifying beings in the universe. As long as one lives and breathes, he must have desires. For the dragons, the 2 most dominant desires were pride and wrath. As the controller of sins, it was nothing to him to bring those desires to light. Ancestor Ymir took a deep breath and said with a bitter pained smile, and so, I fell a victim to my own wrathful desires and ended up massacring more than 70% of my race. Dear God! Chills coursed on Felix's spine at the sound of that. Not in his wildest dreams did he anticipate that the ancestral dragon would be the true culprit of the dragon's fall in that era. 70% of ancient dragons slaughtered by his hands, why? Because he wanted to increase his social status. Instead of those cosmic beings killing him, they gave him the most wicked punishment. In a sense, it was somewhat even ironical. He came demanding immortality but ended up being reminded of his own mortality. No wonder his pride shattered, no wonder he looks fragile and weak, no wonder he was scared shitless of Asna. Felix could only empathize with Ancestor Ymir. Boy, I don't deserve anyone's empathy. Ancestor Ymir shook his head, I brought this upon myself and included my poor descendants in this mess. No one to blame but myself, no one. Chapter 984 Ancestor Ymir's second punishment. How did you manage to escape with the survivors? Did you break off the Paragon of Sins control? Lady Sphinx moved on, not wanting to see Ancestor Ymir feeling sorry for himself. Break it off. Ancestor Ymir chuckled in self-ridicule, if I had such a godly will, I wouldn't have turned a slave to my desires. So what happened? I don't know, my mind turned clear again while I was chalking my descendant. I wasn't the only one freed from the wrathful thoughts as the rest of my descendants all paused fighting simultaneously. Ancestor Ymir shared. Was it a show of mercy from the paragon of sins, or they just wanted to teach you a lesson instead of eradicating your race? Lady Sphinx wondered. Who knows? Ancestor Ymir sighed. I didn't have such thoughts back then, I just wanted to get out of that cursed city as fast as possible, not daring to spare a single glance at the countless corpses of my descendants. Felix couldn't even imagine how Ancestor Ymir felt back then, the fact that he was still able to think logically was already a feat on its own. He knew that if he was in his position, he would have honestly gone insane. So, you led the rest of the survivors to a Carius galaxy. Yes, but it wasn't as easy as it sounds. Ancestor Ymir smiled wryly. The survivors were all terrified of me and didn't dare to follow my orders. Who could blame them? They were living peacefully a few hours ago before they started killing their own brothers and sisters. To make matters worse, their own great father joined the slaughter instead of saving them. In their eyes, the Ancestor Ymir was the incarnation of the devil at that time. I knew that it was too late for words to solve our situation. So, I abused my spiritual pressure to force them into remaining in their places while I was busy cutting off a portion of the city. Why did you so? At that moment I didn't really know. Ancestor Ymir answered, but with time, I understood that I did it to punish myself for this grave mistake. You were already punished enough. Asna sighed. Ancestor Ymir shook his head in disagreement and continued on his narration. I picked up the survivors on my back and collected all the corpses of my descendants on the separated piece of the city. Then, I placed it in my divine spatial ring and blew up the main city. No wonder the first dragon city had disappeared and no one knew exactly what happened to the dragons before the immigration. Felix thought to himself. By taking the corpses and blowing the main city, no one was able to find out clues on what occurred to the dragons. The fact that survivors kept their mouth shut made it even more mysterious. After reaching this galaxy, I picked a planet with a dimensional pocket and settled everyone inside. Ancestor Ymir smiled bitterly. Only then did I release my spiritual pressure and explained everything to my descendants. That must have been tough. Asna commentated. Tough can't even describe it. I was renounced by my own race and treated as mere air. Even though I knew that I can always control them with my spiritual pressure, I respected their wishes. Felix and the others couldn't help but feel sorry for him even though he felt like he deserved it. To get renounced by your own race while being the first to be born was really a hard pill to swallow. Just being disowned by your own parents hurt like sleeping on a bed of nails. I guess that's just about everything. Ancestor Ymir concluded. I secluded myself and watched my descendants clean the destroyed city and build a new one. With years going by, they reproduced and erased that hellish memory out of their minds, not telling the future generation anything about it. It must have come as a shock when the dimensional pocket opened, and they realized that only 50 years had gone by. Lady Sphinx said. Shock is an understatement. Ancestor Ymir chuckled. The time difference was quite vast as we have spent 5 millennials more or less during that duration. No wonder the environment constantly changes. Felix couldn't help but take a deep breath in shock at the sound of that. Well, my descendants would rather not live any more inside the dimensional pocket after knowing about such a massive difference in time. Ancestor Ymir said, they immigrated at the same time, knowing that if they remained inside, they would be stuck for another 5,000 years. It was an expected reaction honestly. No one would want to live in a bubble, especially if time was running 100 times faster. It would make them feel like they were wasting thousands of years from their lives while the outside world didn't move an inch. I decided to remain within the dimensional pocket in fear of attracting their wrath again. Ancestor Ymir said, the last thing I want is to have the same scenario repeat for my descendants, who already moved on their lives. But, isn't better to hide outside? Felix frowned, you will keep aging at crazy rate. You still don't understand. Ancestor Ymir smiled kindly as he eyed Felix, that's my own punishment for seeking immortality. Everyone was left at loss for words after figuring out what he meant. Ancestor Ymir had punished himself for seeking immortality by aging at 100 times faster than outside universe. No wonder he died so early and his corpse was in perfect shape. Felix thought to himself after realizing that the royal clans must have found their ancestor Ymir's corpse during their exploration of the dimensional pocket. 100 million years had gone by since the immigration of the dragon race. Just a million year going by translated to tens of millions of years in the dimensional pocket. No matter how great ancestor Ymir's longevity, he couldn't escape the encroachment of death as the years gone by. For the dragons, dying a normal death from age was quite shameful, so, whenever dragons feel the breath of death on their necks, they challenge each other for one last epic battle. If this was how most dragons felt, there was no need to mention how bad it was for ancestor Ymir to suffer such a lonely and miserable death. You really are something else. Lady Sphinx sighed exasperatedly, you went through all of that and still refused to leave this plane. I wanted to embrace death dearly, but I just couldn't leave my descendants behind while knowing that the paragon of sins or other unigens might come to finish the job and eradicate everyone. Ancestor Ymir smiled wryly, I kept this wisp of consciousness alive within this spiritual natural treasure to check on them once every cycle. You truly went through a lot. By now, everyone had figured out the last piece of the puzzle on their own. With time gone by and the future generations having no clue about the horrors of the first dragon city, it made it easier for ancestor Ymir to meet with the new generations and reclaim his lost respect and authority. Felix didn't know if he ever told them the truth or not. Whatever it was, the dragon race started treating the dimensional pocket as the resting place of their ancestor and always paid him a visit in every cycle. With time, this turned into the current heirs ceremony, where the 4 clans contest to have a personal meeting with the ancestor. 100 million years gone by on the outside universe, this translated to 10 billion years more or less inside the dimensional pocket. Crazy, just what kind of life is this? How can someone live that long and still be sane enough to hold a conversation? Felix didn't know if he should feel odd or sad at ancestor Ymir. Ha ha ha, from your expression, I can see that you think I have been staying up all that long. Ancestor Ymir laughed in a friendly manner, I was always sleeping between cycles. Makes sense. Thor and the others expected as much. Still, it must have been tough. Jormungandr said. They understood that ancestor Ymir kept going simply because of his guilt and worry about his descendants. If he didn't have such a grave purpose, he wouldn't have lived that long even if he was able to negate the loneliness with sleep. So, how were you able to control this dimensional pocket? Lady Sphinx wondered, you said that you have found it. Ever since he mentioned it, Lady Sphinx's curiosity had been bothering her to know about his method. She had told Felix before that ancestor Ymir must have created the dimensional pocket to control who enters and leaves. But after finding out that it was natural, everything changed. She understood that it was simply impossible for him to rule and control a natural-born dimensional pocket. That's in the realm of laws. Chapter 985 Taking Advantage of the Dimensional Pocket. I am not too sure about that. Ancestor Ymir rubbed his chin as he confessed, I woke up one day to find myself capable of sensing the laws in dimensional pocket. I can open dimensional cracks, kick beings outside, terraform the environment, and just do as I pleased within it if my mental energy allowed me to, though, I can't leave the premise of the dimensional pocket. How is that possible? Jormungandr frowned, finding it hard to believe. He knew that the realms of laws were simply inaccessible to even the primogenitors, don't even mention ancestral Ymir, who was still considered as a mortal. The closest they have gotten to the laws was creating the elemental domains, not even the wisest and greatest primogenitors managed to go beyond that. Figures. Ancestor Ymir shrugged his shoulders. Lady Sphinx used the hundreds of her copies' brains to seek the most plausible theory for such an uncanny phenomenon. A mortal ruling over the laws? That was a humongous step forward in her laws research. After a few seconds of elimination, thousands of theories, she finally locked on one with the highest probability of being correct. I believe that the dimensional pocket has taken you as its consciousness instead of growing a new one on its own. Lady Sphinx disclosed calmly, after all, you have lived here for billions of years. We all know that anything can grow a consciousness if the right conditions were met. It wasn't far-fetched that this happened. After all, the elemental galaxy had mountains, rivers, seas, planets, stars, and even tiny pebbles with consciousness. Hell, it was believed that the entire galaxy had grown its own consciousness. But, that wasn't proven yet. That sounds plausible. Ancestor Ymir confessed, I was asleep for more than 1 billion years after my original descendants retreated outside. When I woke up, I found myself more attentive to anything ongoing within the dimensional pocket. I am guessing that every time you woke up, you started feeling closer to the dimensional pocket until the day you finally merged your consciousness with it. Lady Sphinx nodded, now it does make sense. Lady Sphinx believed if such uncanny phenomena was going to happen, it had to be a gradual process. So, I can hang around here for a couple of years and still leave the dimensional pocket without needing the gate. Felix suddenly wondered. If it's under a century, you can stay as much as possible. Ancestor Ymir clarified kindly, when the dimensional gate gets closed, it won't open up until the next cycle, I can't do anything about that. However, I can keep a small window open until my mental energy runs out. Felix's eyes brightened in delight at his confirmation. He didn't dream of requesting to stay here for an entire century, but he did hope that he could spend a decade or two. After all, his elemental manipulations were falling behind significantly, and he truly didn't have much time in his hand on the outside world to take care of them, especially when they were time-consuming. Just as Felix was about to voice his request, Ancestor Ymir interrupted him, you don't have to ask. I intended to help you train anything that you desire for as long as you wished. Why? Felix titled his head in confusion. Ancestor Ymir glanced at Asna for a second before turning to Felix. Your fate is intertwined with those beings whether you liked it or not. He said with a piteous tone, your current strength is not enough to warrant even hearing the first letter of their names. Felix remained silent after his assessment. He didn't even dare ask about those beings and their background. Based on what he heard from Ancestor Ymir's story, those beings were capable of requesting or ordering even the Paragon of Sins. The Paragon of Sins was already a frightening being, who strike terrors in the hearts of the primogenitors. The same primogenitors, who Felix was still not even close to 5% of their strength. It was quite demoralizing to think about his position in the ladder when it was put like this. Although Felix was confident in his future, he was still unable to escape the dread of feeling like it was impossible to reach insane height. I didn't say this to demoralize you. Ancestor Ymir eyed Felix with a stern expression, you have the greatest potential I have ever seen in a mortal, those great beings around you are also seeing the same. Lady Sphinx and the others nodded their heads in agreement. I truthfully believe that if there is one mortal capable of reaching the same gate as me and invoking a reaction from them, it will be definitely you. Ancestor Ymir chuckled, though, what come after depends on you. In other words, Ancestor Ymir believed that Felix would climb to the peak if he kept the hard work. However, climbing past that peak was a different story entirely. I made a promise, and I am planning to keep it regardless of what. Felix replied with an assertive tone while glancing at Asna. Asna smiled beautifully as she looked at him, knowing that he was referring to his promise of protection against those beings when she gets freed. I like your boldness and courage. Ancestor Ymir advised, just don't repeat the same mistake as I. Felix nodded with a stern expression. He knew that if he ever offended those beings, there was a high chance of going after the entire human race. Unlike the ancient dragons, there was an unfathomable number of existing humans in the universe. Felix couldn't imagine if they were all killed because of him. That was enough to break any man. Tell me, when do you want to start training? Right now. Felix answered before Ancestor Ymir could finish. After hearing all of this, there was no way Felix would stay still and not focus on improving himself. As you wish. Ancestor Ymir chuckled kindly and said, follow me outside. After exiting the consciousness space, Felix saw that the ancestral wine jar was already flying to the top of the nearest mountain. When they reached the summit, Ancestor Ymir told him to sit in the center. I have observed your fights with my descendants. Ancestor Ymir mentioned, your lightning and gemstone manipulation aren't that great. Felix nodded and summarized everything related to his 3 perfect manipulations, wanting to give him a better understanding on why they weren't all equally good. The elders didn't oppose Felix telling Ancestor Ymir about his story. Looks like everyone with you has their own share of troubles like me. Ancestor Ymir sighed after hearing that all the tenants within Felix's mind had their own struggles and goals. The Asgardian faction were seeking revenge. Carbuncle was hoping to revive his wife from the spirit realm. Lady Sphinx was attempting to collect all the maniacal monoliths. Asna sought to separate her soul from Felix and hopefully live a life without the constraint of her duties. Mistress Candace pursued improvement on her social status and strength by taking care of the future paragon of sins. Lord Kaus, well, no one knew his true agenda yet and its relation with Nimmo. Child, you are like a train and everyone on board has paid for their tickets. Ancestor Ymir asked Felix calmly, what's the train's purpose? Transporting all passengers to their destinations. Felix answered while narrowing his eyes in focus. The analogy might sound like Felix was being taken advantage of, but he really wasn't. Everything that he owned was related to one of the tenants in his mind. Without them, he wouldn't be even sitting here. They paid for their tickets, and it was his job to help them achieve their goals, no matter how difficult they were. Honestly, besides Lord Kaus and Carbuncle, the others would never pressure Felix to help them out with their goals. Asna already stated that she was fine just being with him even if it meant never existing in the real world. Lady Sphinx didn't prioritize maniacal monoliths to the point she would force Felix into deadly situations. The Asgardians could give up on their revenge if it proved too much for Felix. It was Felix who simply couldn't remain still after accepting their gifts and help for the past years. You should continue with your lightning manipulation. The moment Ancestor Ymir finished speaking, the sky above Felix turned dark all of a sudden. When Felix lifted his head, he saw countless thick gloomy grey clouds gather. Rumble rumble. Without warning, lightning bolts started raining down by the tens and hundreds above the summit, striking it continuously. You really can control all laws in the dimensional pocket. Felix could only eye the ancestral wine jar with a stunned look while being struck continuously with lightning bolts. When Felix heard that he could terraform the environment, he had a feeling that he could do something like this, but he didn't fully believe it. Summoning real thunderclouds meant that Felix's affinity training would be 10 times to 100 times much faster. After all, training in a rich environment of the same affinity wasn't the same as doing it in a random area. I can actually reach kilometers in my external manipulation for all of my elements, not even a year would have gone by on the outside. Felix's grinned widely at such an unexpected gift. Chapter 986 The Upper Echelon's Worry. 100 days later inside the dimensional pocket. Felix's lightning affinity was improving at a steady pace, helping him learn and master more external lightning abilities. The best part? There was no one to bother him as the entire dimensional pocket was a safe haven. In addition, no one was going to bother him with messages, giving him crystal clear focus. Naturally, Felix had already contacted those close to him and informed them that he was fine inside the dimensional pocket and would be absent for half a year to a year. Because connection to the Queen AI was blocked, he requested Mistress Candace to send the emails. She had her main consciousness on the outside, so it didn't cause her any trouble. Felix made sure that everyone he contacted to keep the information private. He wanted to avoid alerting the dragons that he managed to stay an entire century within the dimensional pocket. He would rather not see them preparing armies at his exit, thinking that he must have done something to their ancestor when he leaves. Speaking about dragons, the entire royal family was losing their sh*t at the notion that Felix hadn't exited after 24 hours. Now, even Felix's fans and viewers were started to see that something fishy was going on. Based on the information on the network, the meeting shouldn't last more than 2 minutes. Don't tell me they locked our lord inside. As expected of our lord. The dragon's ancestor must have loved having him around. I am having a bad feeling about this. Felix's fans, who were still in the dark, could only express their comments and worries in the stream chat. The fact that the royal family didn't come out with a statement yet made them even more agitated. He is still inside. Yes, my lord. Contact me the moment he gets kicked out. Will do, my lord. A blue human servant bowed his head respectfully in front of a gigantic black-scaled dragon before excusing himself from the chamber. This black dragon was none other than Prince Domino. All of his sustained injuries seemed to have healed perfectly in the past 24 hours. However, he still had an irritated expression like he had a bone stuck between his teeth. Who could blame him? He ate 2 nukes while he was merely seeking a true physical confrontation with his opponents. If his pride wasn't too high, he would have already resorted to nukes as well in the ceremony. He knew that if he ever fired one, he would have turned both Prince Arantis and Felix into dust particles. As much as he was irked by the way he lost the ceremony, he didn't make excuses. However, it didn't mean that his disgruntlement would be appeased with time. He still hasn't fulfilled his promise of a 1 versus 1 fight. Prince Domino narrowed his eyes as he recalled the terms of their bet. Felix had promised him a 1 vs 1 fight if he helped him fool the White Clan into taking him in their team. Although they had fought twice in the ceremony, they didn't count in his eyes. It was somewhat true. Felix ditched the first fight, which was a dickish move. The second one shouldn't even be counted as a fight since they were prioritizing the ancestral wine jar. 1 day, 1 month, even 1 year. Prince Domino eyed the giant moon above him as he said coldly, I will be waiting to redeem myself. Prince Domino was not convinced one bit that Felix had defeated him. Until he battled Felix without anyone's interference, he would never admit that Felix was stronger than him. The fact that he had lost the ceremony had already dealt a massive blow to his self-esteem and future within the royal family. In his eyes, he had a tiny bit of hope that if he managed to defeat Felix in a 1 versus 1 battle, his father would reconsider reinvesting in him to challenge the Elder Dragon. While Prince Domino only cared about fighting Felix, the 4 royal clan officials had joined an emergency meeting to handle this abnormal situation. I am really starting to think that our ancestor has killed the Dragon Slayer. Clan head Bimid said. 100 days, at this point, anything is possible. Clan head Kirsoon sighed. If it were before, he would have disapproved it, but 100 days was really too long for a meeting. Maybe our ancestor is keeping him around due to his masters. Clan head Igos suggested. That's plausible. Everyone nodded their heads in agreement. They knew that Felix had primogenitors as his masters due to being informed of matters around the Champions Games. In their eyes, it only made sense for the primogenitors to keep a wisp of their consciousness within Felix's mind. Compared to Felix's getting killed or trapped, this made much more sense. But still, 100 days is a long time. Clan head Bimid said, don't forget that our ancestor burned his mental energy to keep a dimensional backdoor for the last participant to leave. As the 4 clan heads, they naturally knew plenty of matters about their ancestor. After all, if he didn't share those things with them, he would naturally not share them with anyone. Assumptions aren't going to help us deal with the backlash of the viewers. One of the White Clan officials noted, we need to prepare ourselves for the notion that the Dragon Slayer might stay much longer than this. Backlash? His people can *ck themselves. Clan head Azastirth sneered, even if we angered the entire human race, what the hell can they do? Don't forget that they are still just a bunch of worms with no guts. Upon hearing so, the official realized that he was projecting Felix's strength into his entire race, making him forget that humans were still at the bottom of the barrel. Felix was simply an anomaly. Look at us, worried about outsiders' reaction. We have been really affected too deeply by the Dragon's Lair. Clan head Bemid chuckled. Exactly, the only purpose of this meeting should be how to contain the royal dragon's discussion about the time difference. Everyone's expression hardened at the sound of that. In their eyes, this was a much more serious issue than Felix dying in the dimensional pocket. That's because the ancestor's death was related to the time difference heavily. When Ancestor Ymir's corpse was found in the dimensional pocket by the royal family, the news weren't contained as everyone hoped. So, it became common knowledge that the Ancestor Ymir had died in the dimensional pocket and why it was called the sacred resting grounds of the ancestor. As for the cause of death, no one but the upper echelon of the dragon race knew that he had literally committed suicide by exhausting his lifespan. If the time difference of the dimensional pocket was to ever get exposed in the open, the smart ones would connect the dots easily. Instead of having a mysterious and maybe an epic death, everyone would start believing that the ancestor of the dragons had died such a shameful death. This was a massive hit to the reputation of the dragons and their authority within the universe. This time, they would truly turn into a laughingstock. So, the upper echelon refused to even share the knowledge about the time difference to the red dragons. Most of the royal dragons knowing about it was already too much. I suggest that each clan keep a close eye on their members. I don't care if you ban discussing the Dragon's Lair in general to avoid our secret getting out. Clan head Igos said coldly, just make sure to keep a tight lid on it. Honestly, the only real way for this to blow out is for the Dragon's Lair to leave as soon as possible. Clan head Bemid sighed. Everyone nodded their heads in agreement. Alas, they were in for a treat. 5 years later in the dimensional pocket, Felix could be seen floating in a mediation position while being carried with millions of electrical arcs connected with the ground. He was still on the same summit and in the same position, however, there was now a sea of electricity around him, reaching at least 500 meters. Giant sword at 400 meters to my right. With a mere thought, Felix managed to manifest a humongous sword made completely electricity without him needing to even glance at its location. Giant axe 400 meters to my left. On the side of the mountain, a gigantic one-handed axe was created. Although both weapons were made out of lightning, they appeared to be refined and complete. If it wasn't for some electrical tongues being emitted once in a while, no one would doubt that they were created out of solid white materials. Fight! Felix lifted both of his hands and started moving them akin to an orchestra conductor. Following the movements of his fingers, the giant sword and axe started trading blows in the air, resulting in millions of electrical tongues to get splashed everywhere. While he was controlling them, Felix was manifesting other gigantic weapons in the sea of electricity and have them join the fun. This might seem simple, but it required a tremendous amount of concentration and great congestive reasoning to multitask at such a high level. If it wasn't for Felix spending an entire 5 years focusing purely on his lightning manipulation, he would have never reached such height. It's time to switch back to poison, Hormungandr suggested as he watched Felix. Not yet. Thor's eyelids twitched. Don't be too impatient, he has another 95 years. I disagree. Hormungandr eyed him in annoyance. He needs to have balance in all of his elements. So, he must return to poison and push his external range to 0.5 kilometer in it as well. Stop being jealous. You will ruin my student's efforts. He is my F***ing student too. They are at it again. Lady Sphinx could only watch them headbutt each other with an annoyed expression. Ever since Felix's lightning manipulation surpassed his poison manipulation, Thor always had a smug smile on his face when he deals with Hormungandr. This had driven Hormungandr insane, making him unable to sit still anymore. Why can't they be like Carbuncle? Asna commentated with a faint chuckle as she eyed Carbuncle chilling above the consciousness lake with sunglasses and thick joint in his lips. Ever since he had given Felix his gemstone manipulation, he never cared about how he utilized it. If Felix was confused about something, he explains it to him in a crystal and quick manner to leave him smoke in peace. So, even though they weren't considered to have a master-slash-student relation, Felix was gaining everything from it. Chapter 987 LSLT Still Even My Heart? While Thor and Hormungandr were arguing, Ancestor Ymir approached Lady Sphinx and sat next to her. Seeing that he had a serious expression, Lady Sphinx closed her book gently and placed it on her lap. Instead of speaking at once, Ancestor Ymir turned to stare at Felix, who was busting his ass to control more than 10 gigantic electrical weapons simultaneously. For the past 5 years, Ancestor Ymir had observed Felix a great deal, making him quite pleased with his hard work. Although Felix had a century of time, he still invested more than 16 hours a day to train. To do so every single day for 5 years straight required an uncanny and respectful discipline. I have been thinking lately, can humans really adapt to everything? Ancestor Ymir finally asked. In what sense? Physical-wise? Theoretically yes. Lady Sphinx answered, Felix's body has adapted to multiple primogenitor's bloodlines and also an entire devourer's heart. If he wasn't a human, it would have been near impossible. Only humans could be treated as clean white sheet in the universe, allowing them to adapt to almost any type of modification as long as it was reasonable. Is that so? Ancestor Ymir rubbed his chin thoughtfully for a few moments before suggesting, can he adapt to the dragon's cultivation system as well? Hey? What do you mean? Isn't it gone already? Lady Sphinx raised an eyebrow in surprise. Unlike the public, she knew that the dragon's cultivation system didn't exist anymore. In the old times, dragons were believed to gain strength from purely devouring minerals and absorbing the energy within them based on their rarities. However, the dragons started having trouble absorbing energy from minerals with each newborn generation until they were barely capable of getting anything from them. No one knew why it happened and how could it happen. The dragons wanted to avoid exposing their weakness to the open, so they kept it a secret and eluded the public to believe that their cultivation system was still a thing. That's why most dragons had treasuries full of precious minerals. They get gifted by other races, believing that they were using them to get stronger, but in reality, they were nothing but stones in their eyes. This was one of the reasons why dragons were tiny compared to the ancient dragons. It's gone all right. Ancestor Ymir sighed with a bitter expression, I can only assume that it had been taken from my race by them to avoid another act of rebellion. I thought the same after hearing your story. Lady Sphinx nodded. Lady Sphinx knew that those beings were capable of doing such thing if provoked. Ancestor Ymir did more than that. Because of his actions, his race had to suffer for future generations until eternity ends. They are truly too ruthless. Fenrir commented after picking up on their conversation. I know that more anyone else. Ancestor Ymir smiled wryly. So, what did you mean by having Felix to adapt to dragon's cultivation system? Lady Sphinx wondered, how can he adapt to something that didn't exist anymore? Not even dragons had their own cultivation system, forcing them to rely solely on their bloodline purity and the bloodline treasures. Well, my heart secured around here. Ancestor Ymir suggested, I think you can put it in him and help him obtain my cultivation system like you did with the Devourer's heart. First, I have no clue how you managed to keep your heart in good condition after billions of years. Lady Sphinx's eyelids twitched as said, second, it was already near impossible for me to modify Felix's body to accept the Devourer's heart. It's 100% impossible to have another heart within him. Lady Sphinx rarely said that it was impossible to pull off something as it defies her explorative nature. But in this case, she was confident that no one but the Creator could pull off such a thing. Why so? Aren't humans pretty adaptive? Ancestor Ymir was still not convinced. Adaptive is one thing and having 3 hearts and 3 bloodstreams was another. Lady Sphinx clarified, unless one was born with a body to support the harmonization of 3 hearts, it's simply impossible. Felix is not a cephalopod and I can't make him one to handle 3 hearts at once. Octopuses and squids were known to have 3 hearts, 2 hearts pump blood to the gills to take up oxygen, and the other pumps blood around the body. A balanced system that actually required 3 hearts. But in the case of Felix, 1 heart was more than enough to live perfectly, 2 hearts was pushing his body limits. 3 hearts shouldn't even be considered as an option. Lady Sphinx refused to screw up with Felix's body if the chance of his death or organs failure was far too high. She would rather not repeat the same mistake with the void domain's replacement. Is that so? Ancestor Ymir sighed in disappointment. Why did you even suggest such a thing? Lady Sphinx wondered. You don't owe Felix or us anything. The fact that you are allowing him to train for free here is already giving him too much. When it came to dealing with those beings, there is no such a thing as too much. Ancestor Ymir smiled kindly. If he is going to deal with them in his life eventually, I just felt like he will need any kind of help. Who knows? Maybe he might cause them some troubles. Ancestor Ymir laughed. I will be full-filed to know my heart was there when it happened. Ancestor Ymir might not show it under his appearance of weakness and fragility, but his hate on those beings knew no bounds. He wished to see them get ripped apart for ruining his entire race, but he knew that no such thing was going to happen. However, after seeing Felix's discipline, uncanny potential, and the army of great masters behind his back, he felt that if someone could make his dream happen, it would be definitely him. I am sorry to disappoint you, but the only way to have your heart in his body, is by giving up on the Devourer's heart. Lady Sphinx shook her head. If he did so, he will lose any kind of strength he obtained through his marks. Since the replacement enhancement was heavily related to the marks, it would end up getting affected as well. Felix could count himself lucky if he remained with 50k and BF after losing his Devourer's heart. Let's not do that. Ancestor Ymir said. He just wanted to help out Felix in his difficult endeavor. If it wasn't possible without influencing his already established foundation, then it was better not to mention it. How about you give it to my student instead? Fenrir inserted Noah without an ounce of shame. Your student? Who is TH? Hell no. F***ck off, this is Felix's opportunity. Before Ancestor Ymir could ask, Thor and Hormungandr paused their argument almost simultaneously and teleported next to Fenrir, then, they dragged him away with a sleeper choke. They might fight over Felix's training schedule, but when it came to an outsider trying to screw up with his improvement, they would unite instantly. You stingy bastards, Lady Sphinx already gave her verdict that it's not possible. Why not let Noah benefit from it, so he can be more useful? Fenrir eyed them in irritation as he escaped easily from their sleeper choke. I am all down for your student to improve and be a useful asset to Felix. Hormungandr said with a firm tone, but, it doesn't mean that I will approve of him stealing my student's opportunities. Indeed, Felix has almost broken his back to carry those losers in this ceremony to reach this far. Thor sneered, how is it fair that your student will get the best prize while you guys are chilling in another part of the universe? I understand where you are coming from. Fenrir said calmly, that's why I didn't suggest it until I was assured that your student will not be using it. Fenrir did have a point. If a treasure wasn't meant for Felix, then it was better to let Noah have it than be petty about it and no one get it. They were heading to the same destination anyway. I would agree if all options have been exhausted. Thor was still adamant for Felix to get the opportunity. Ymir has suggested using the heart like the Devourer's heart, but it can be used in other ways. Everyone turned to Lady Sphinx to see if it was feasible to use Ancestor Ymir's heart in other ways. Lady Sphinx thought about it for a few moments before expressing, there is another method, but he won't be getting the dragon's cultivation system if used. What will he be getting? That needs further studying. Lady Sphinx replied. Lady Sphinx had never dealt with a heart of such a great figure. Ancestor Ymir's strength was equal to primogenitor's. This signified that his heart was much better than Felix's Devourer's heart by miles as it was fully developed. Lady Sphinx refused to make assumptions without studying it truly. How about this, if the other methods are lackluster and won't benefit mostly from Ymir's heart, you can then use it on your student. Hormungandr suggested, however, if we are satisfied with the other method, you have no right to judge us even if it meant the loss of a cultivation system. Fine. Fenrir cursed under his breath as he walked away, stingy bastards. After a decision was made, everyone returned to their own businesses, leaving Ancestor Ymir staring at them with a dumbfounded expression. Is it still even my heart? Chapter 988 A frozen heart is a good heart. Well, I can't study the heart while being here. Lady Sphinx disclosed. There was no access to Queen AI to help them scan Ymir's heart and create a close virtual copy of it. Felix shouldn't take the heart to her since he would lose out decades of time inside the dimensional pocket by being merely a few months on the outside. How about you use Felix for research? Thor suggested. He has a research lab as well, and he is smart enough to follow your orders. I am not talking about that. Lady Sphinx shook her head. For such difficult project, I need to have perfect copies of the heart and subject's body. I can only do so with my sand manipulation. Lady Sphinx's research prowess was heavily reliant on her sand abilities. It allowed her to explore all options with extreme precision and without worrying about losing either the subject or the object. I can be responsible for the delivery. Mistress Candace said, I just need access to the dimensional pocket the first time. I can exit it by entering the void realm since it's connected to everything. It was impossible for Mistress Candace to enter the dimensional pocket from the void realm since its available gates were connected with the matter universe. However, exiting it was much easier because the void domain was mirroring all dimensions and realms, allowing Mistress Candace to open a void rift from the dimensional pocket easily. If it's just for one entry, my mental energy will exhaust 1 year or 2 sooner than anticipated. Ancestor Ymir informed. Losing 1 or 2 years from a century are much better than letting Lady Sphinx study Ymir's heart without her equipment and abilities. Hormungandr supported. Everyone nodded their heads in agreement. Now that the decision was approved, Mistress Candace was given the exact location of the back door. It was opened slightly further away from the holy grounds of the dragons. Ancestor Ymir opened a new background in different locations each time to avoid having his descendants attempting to return to the dimensional pocket after getting kicked out. Should I bring Nimmo with me? Mistress Candace wondered. If another one got added, you will lose 2 more years. Ancestor Ymir warned. I think it's worth it. Thor said, Nimmo also needs an insane amount of time to grow up properly. Since he can already open void rifts on his own, he wouldn't bother Felix much and be responsible over his own food. Plus, Felix will miss Nimmo a lot if he spent a century without seeing him. Asna supported the idea. A century might be nothing for those monsters, who lived for millions to billions of years, but it was an extremely long period for a human. After everyone approved, Mistress Candace entered the dimensional window with Nimmo in her arms. The instant they arrived at the colorful dimensional pocket, Nimmo started screaming excitedly akin to a child entering Wonderland. Feeling his urge to escape her grasp, Mistress Candace swiftly flew in direction of Felix. It didn't take her long to arrive above the sea of lightning and the show that Felix was putting with giant weapons. Immediately after Nimmo spotted Felix, his eyes brightened up in happiness and blinked above his lap. Then, he started licking his face, not caring about the electrical bolts hitting him. Nimmo. Felix raised an eyebrow in surprise after he opened his eyes and saw Nimmo's tongue all over his face. He waved his hand and the entire sea of lightning disappeared. As for the thunderclouds above him, they were all removed by Ancestor Ymir based on his request to start his external manipulation training. Hello, Sir Felix. Mistress Candace appeared before Felix and bowed her head apologetically. Sorry for interrupting your training. It's all right, but did something happen for you guys to come here? Felix wondered as he rubbed Nimmo's belly. Come down here. Lady Sphinx said. Knowing that it must be something important, Felix swiftly entered his consciousness space. In there, he was informed about Ancestor Ymir's heart and everything that they had discussed. How can I help? Felix offered his assistance after realizing that his future would be impacted heavily if Lady Sphinx managed to pull off the merge with Ymir's heart. He didn't mind having 3 hearts if they weren't going to affect him negatively, that's because the more hearts he had, the harder to kill him. Felix had escaped death a few times due to his devourer's heart replacing his human heart after gotten damaged heavily. With the 3rd heart, he would really be considered as a cockroach. You can accompany Mistress Candace to Ymir's heart. All right. Without delay, Felix exited his consciousness space and placed Nemo on his shoulders. Then, he flew with Mistress Candace after the wine jar. It took them to a humongous red tree with leaves burning up. This was quite an uncanny and illogical sight to have a tree compatible with flames. The ancestral wine jar went towards the trunk of the tree and passed through it, leaving behind water like ripples. Felix and Mistress Candace eyed each other for a second in surprise before going through the tree trunk in the same manner. After passing through it, they opened their eyes to a breathtaking sight of a cozy small spherical cave that was covered completely in vines and flowers. In the center of the cave, there was a humongous crimson heart that was 3 times bigger than a wrecking ball. It was frozen solid in a much bigger cube of crystal ice. Everyone was left at loss for words as they eyed the gigantic heart, having no clue how did Ancestor Ymir ever thought that it was possible to plant such a monstrosity in Felix's chest. I can already see you guys judging my intelligence. Ancestor Ymir's eyelids twitched after hearing not a single comment on his heart. I am capable of controlling the size of my heart as I pleased as long as my consciousness can enter it. No one thought that you can't do so, Elder. Felix coughed to cover for his previous doubt. No wonder you managed to keep it intact for such a long period of time. Thor took an extra step and changed the subject by mentioning the cubic ice. Good, I was worrying that you have left it to absorb elemental energy freely all this time. Lady Sphinx praised as well. In this universe, almost everything was capable of absorbing elemental energy and gain consciousness as long as some conditions were met. In the case of Ancestor Ymir's heart, if it was left to absorb elemental energy for billions and billions of years, there was no doubt that it would turn into one of the greatest natural treasures in the history of the universe. Gaining consciousness, maybe, maybe not. But, anyone consuming it might not even live to tell the tale due to how overwhelming the benefits it would give. This all sounded nice, but Lady Sphinx didn't want such a thing. That's because if it was turned into a natural treasure, it would lose its original purpose and have nothing to offer but get utilized as food or for concoction. Well, I was saving it for my descendants, hoping that one of them might show me that he was worthy to have my heart replaced his own and restart our cultivation system. Ancestor Ymir sighed, alas, with each generation, my descendants keep getting worse and worse. How about the Elder Dragon? Felix wondered. He is believed to be the greatest dragon to be born with the highest amount of purity after the ancient dragons. If he has your heart, I believe he can get even stronger. That brat? The greatest. Ancestor Ymir laughed like he heard the funniest joke in his life. Haha, you know nothing, child. Chapter 989 The Truth About the Bloodline Treasures. Hey? Did I say something wrong? Felix titled his head in confusion. Felix simply repeated what was believed in public ever since the foundation of the SG Alliance. The Elder Dragon was thought by everyone to be the strongest to be born in the dragon race. The fact that he was capable of reaching 100 kilometers in size or even bigger was enough proof. It was simply incomparable to other dragons, who could barely surpass 70 meters. Sure, he wasn't as amazing as the ancient dragons, but he was much closer to them than the other dragons. Was he always capable of reaching 100 kilometers in size? Ancestor Ymir asked. Well, no. But, he reached it after he grew to an adult. Felix answered. Ancestor Ymir chuckled, that's where you have been fooled, just like everyone else. What do you mean? The current Elder Dragon has never been meant to reach such a size, in fact, he was never meant to even surpass 100 meters just like every other dragon. Hey! Felix was stunned to hear such a revelation. If it didn't come from the ancestor of the dragons himself, he wouldn't have believed it. The big boss of the alliance should have been merely like any other dragon? It was preposterous. How did he become so big then? Asna wondered. It was because of me. Ancestor Ymir confessed, when I realized that my descendants are growing weaker and weaker with each generation, I knew that I had to do something to save them from hitting the bottom. Is this related to bloodline treasures? Lady Sphinx inquired, already knowing where he was going with this. Yes. Ancestor Ymir confirmed before adding, I have created a technique that allows my descendants to absorb the royal gemstones of each other. Come again. Felix's eyes widened in disbelief. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots and recognize that Ancestor Ymir was implying that the bloodline treasures were actually royal gemstones of dragons. I know, you have been told that the bloodline treasures are the crystallization of the ancient dragon's blood. Ancestor Ymir chuckled. Indeed, Felix and everyone else were told that. No one bothered to think about it for a split second since it did make some sense. The bloodline treasures were found mostly in the first dragon city, implying heavy relation to the ancient dragons. So, you are telling me that all bloodline treasures found here are actually royal gemstones of dead dragons? Felix said. Yes. Ancestor Ymir nodded. Why do you think that all of them had different colors? Thinking about it, Felix did find it somewhat odd that some of the bloodline treasures he found were blue, orange, or even white. Sure, the majority were still red gemstones, but those couple bloodline treasures did raise some doubt. But, he was too focused about winning the ceremony to waste his energy on something useless. Holy, I just recalled. Felix's pupil enlarged in shock as he disclosed, when a royal dragon dies, his gemstone get extracted by the royal family for safekeeping inside the hall of the deceased. Don't tell me that there was no such a thing and that the royal family is merely extracting those royal gemstones to boost their strength. That's precisely what is going on. Ancestor Ymir confirmed it causally before adding, who do you think most of those royal gemstones goes to? The elder dragon. Indeed. Ancestor Ymir continued on, though, the royal gemstones obtained from the dead weren't the ones that helped him reach such a moderate size compared to the others. It was the fact that he was the elder dragon when I created the technique. Ancestor Ymir mentioned, at that time, the royal family had 100,000 royal gemstones if not more extracted from the corpses of the massacred ancient dragons. It was the biggest pool ever of gigantic royal gemstones simply waiting to be used. Felix understood immediately that the elder dragon must have used his authority as the supreme emperor to get himself the biggest share of the royal gemstones. The more he consumed, the stronger he had gotten and the less resistance he was met by the officials. By the time he had reached 100 kilometers in size and was considered to be one of the strongest beings in the universe, not a single dragon was capable of standing against him. This must have had happened way before the foundation of the SG Alliance. That's because the first ever recorded video of the Elder Dragon was while he had such a colossal size. Why didn't you oversee the absorption to avoid having one dragon hogging everything? Asna inquired. In a sense, the Elder Dragon wouldn't have dared to hog almost all the ancient royal gemstones if Ancestor Ymir didn't allow it. Why would I do so? Ancestor Ymir replied calmly, I have given them a method to help them at least stay on top of other races. It doesn't concern me how they used it as long as the dragons are considered to be on top. Thinking about it, Elder Dragon might have pulled a dickish move, but it turned out to work out just perfectly for his race. With solely his authoritative pressure and strength, he had made himself the unofficial boss of the SG Alliance. If the royal gemstones were split and a few dragons reached a couple of kilometers in size, they wouldn't have the same level of pressure as the Elder Dragon. He was a different breed and respected by all races. Even the Metal and Hive race, one of the most dangerous races in the universe. Truly a good timing in a good place. Felix remarked. Now, he knew that Elder Dragon was no one special, and he simply lucked out heavily during his term of leadership. If Ancestor Ymir decided to share the technique after he was replaced, the next dragon would have enjoyed this opportunity, giving the universe a different elder dragon. No wonder the 4 royal clans are hoping to replace him. Asna commentated, the next elder dragon would be eligible to obtain the royal gemstones of the deceased royal dragons. Good luck with that. Felix shook his head. Now that I know what it took to reach his level, I know for a fact that not a single dragon is going to replace him anytime soon. It didn't matter whether it was Prince Domino or another prodigy dragon. Unless they were born with the purest dragon bloodline ever, helping them reach his level naturally or devour as many royal gemstones as him. Both options sounded quite impossible to achieve. Doesn't this mean that my portion of the royal gemstones is going to fetch a much higher price than anticipated? Felix grinned. Now that he understood that true importance of those bloodline treasures, the 4 royal clans were going to fight tooth and nail for them. It was quite obvious that the 4 clans were gathering more and more royal gemstones instead of using them wantonly. They did this to help only one dragon of their clan to close the gap with the elder dragon. Considering that not a single dragon could be seen to be above 1 kilometer, they must have collected royal gemstones for a very, very long time. Simply waiting for the destined dragon to be born and replace the elder dragon. That's why Prince Domino could not accept his defeat in the ceremony and wanted to regain his clan's favor by fighting Felix when he leaves the dimensional pocket. His entire future had collapsed because of Felix. For such a straightforward and proud creatures, they really have so much going on behind the curtains. Felix chuckled. If it wasn't for ancestor Ymir, Felix would have never thought that the dragon race carried such heavy secrets on their shadows. Secrets capable of causing the entire dragon race's reputation to hit the gutter. Chapter 990. Half a century later. In a few moments, Ancestor Ymir defrosted the gigantic heart and entered it with his wisp of consciousness. Just like magic, the heart began to shrink in size until it was as small as a normal human's heart. Then, he froze it again and handed it to Mistress Candace. Take care of it. Ancestor Ymir said with a stern tone. I will deliver it in the exact same way. Mistress Candace assured with a serious expression. Candace, make sure to go at your fastest speed. Lady Sphinx requested, with Felix being in the dimensional pocket, each second on the outside counts. Lady Sphinx knew that she had less than a year to research the heart and come up with vital solutions that could help out Felix. She preferred doing so right after he leaves the dimensional pocket instead of dragging it a couple more years, especially, when Felix would be spending a century inside. I will try my best. Wait, take this with you. Just as she was about to leave, Felix beamed 2 containers filled with black substance and handed it to her. Felix hadn't forgotten about the containers filled with that weird dark moss in his spatial card. No one could research it properly besides Lady Sphinx. After taking it, Mistress Candace beamed everything in her spatial card and took off towards the dimensional back door. When she left, Felix and Nemo went to have a fun for a while, exploring the dimensional pocket. While doing so, Felix was teaching Nemo how to get his own food and make sure not cause trouble to Ancestor Ymir. Just open a small void rift and start sucking void energy. Felix said as he watched Nemo opening a big-ass void rift. Eeeeeeeee. Understanding what he meant, Nemo started shrinking the void rift until it was barely half a meter long, then, he placed his head inside and began feasting on the void energy, resembling a horse eating from a bucket. Truly a strange universe. Ancestor Ymir mewed with mixed feelings while playing poker with the tenants. My entire race almost went extinct because of the paragon of sins. Now, you are telling me this is his replacement? Don't hate the powers, hate the owner. Lady Sphinx said calmly while making a call on the table. I am not hating, I just find it somewhat surreal that even someone of such a caliber and strength can be replaced when he screws up. Ancestor Ymir smiled bitterly. I was really out of mind to think that I have reached the top of the universe. Stop contemplating and play, you are losing all of your chips. Thor chided him as he raised Lady Sphinx's call. Sure enough, Ancestor Ymir had the lowest number of chips in the table. That's while they had carbuncle high on new potent combination of weed created specifically by Lady Sphinx. All in, I guess. Months went by, then years. Before long, half a century passed ever since Felix got locked inside the dimensional pocket. Half a century was a really long period in the case of Felix, as he hadn't even lived that long in his previous life, yet, he spent it doing nothing but training, sleeping, romancing with Isna, fooling with Nemo, and repeat. Although it seemed to have been a boring experience to live such a long period in a routine-like manner, but Felix loved every second of it. He did everything that he wanted without anyone bothering him. The fact that he was in a fantasy-like colorful paradise was a bonus to his mental health. If he had spent half a century trapped underground or in a freezing area, it would have been a much different experience. Because his mentality was intact, he had developed and learned a lot from his masters about his elements. At the moment, he had expanded both poison and lightning external manipulation range to a whopping 1 kilometer. If it wasn't extremely time-consuming and grindy to push through the 1 kilometer mark, he would have surpassed even 2 kilometers. Unfortunately, if it was that easy, everyone before him would have reached tens of kilometers if not higher, especially dragons. Prince Domino had reached 3 kilometers in his external manipulation after spending centuries of effort on focusing purely on it. This while he was considered to be a prodigy and carried one of the purest bloodlines. Hence, after Felix reached 1 kilometer in each manipulation, he decided to halt and to spend his time on his other weaknesses. He had prioritized lightning conversion technique, making him master it in a much lesser time than with his poison element. After all, he had already known the ins and outs of how to do it, making it much easier to master. Naturally, when he mastered the third stage of lightning manipulation, he finally got rid of the seal on his gemstone inscriptions. It was truly a goddamn pain in the ass to keep sealing them every so often for the past half-century. Now, he was completely free of seals and could use all three of his elements without an issue. At the moment, Felix was focusing extensively on his gemstone external manipulation, trying to push it as well to 1 kilometer in range. So far, he had reached half a kilometer. Naturally, Felix didn't spend a whole half a century just on his elemental manipulations. He spent many years expanding on his potion making until he finally managed to concoct rank 5 potions. By doing so, he was considered to have been promoted to sage rank. In other words, he could get himself a legit position of power within the Witch Empire since he was part of the upper echelons. Although he was a human, no one could deny him of this right since he shared a dual citizenship in the Witch Empire. But Felix didn't care about any of that when he hit the sage rank. All he wanted was to truly begin on his journey of concocting unique and bizarre unranked potions. Too bad, Lady Sphinx had advised him to keep mastering more rank 5 potions until he had established his footing as a sage witcher. Only then would she start teaching him more about those unranked recipes that could concoct only by her. When Felix wasn't concocting or training his elements, he spends some personal time with Isna in her mansion. Unfortunately, Isna was still not ready to take their relationship to third stage even though they spent half a century with each other. Though, Felix had taken it to the second stage, which was quite an applaudable achievement when it was related to Isna. Felix didn't know why she was still resistant, but if he had to guess, it would definitely be related to her freedom and duty as a Unigen. So, he slowed down his advances as well, making her get comfortable with the way things are. As for Nemo's improvement in the past half-century, well, that's a whole different story on its own. For now, Felix could be seen stretching his arms after waking up from a small induced coma that lasted for 4 years. Every time Felix tired from the routine, he consumes an alarming amount of natural treasures and sleep for a few years to reset his mind. Although Felix had spent half a century of his lifespan, he hadn't changed one bit. He didn't even grow a beard as his genetics from his father made it somewhat impossible. 6 years now total and still haven't reached 7th mark. Felix yawned while scratching his head with a bothered look. It will probably take me decades of sleep to even hit 10th mark. Good morning to you too, old man. Isna cursed in annoyance. Morning, love. Felix smiled charmingly while stepping outside the VR pod. It might not be used to log in, but it could be used as a comfortable bed. Without delay, Felix entered his consciousness space and greeted his masters and the other tenants respectfully before going straight to Asna's mansion. As he expected, he found her lazing in her bed while watching an old drama series, looking as gorgeous as ever. Without saying anything, Felix lifted the cover and sneaked under it before popping his head above her. "Hello there, want to see my new technique?" Before Asna could reply, Felix held her hands together and started assaulting her face with kisses. "Stoob! It's ticklish, and you're putting your saliva all over my face." Asna squirmed from his clutches while laughing. "That's the goal." Felix chuckled as he finally let go of her arms. The moment Asna tried to clean her face with the bed cover, Felix held her chin and pulled her lips closer to his before murmuring, "Did you miss me? You already can. MMM." Alas, her lips were sealed and invaded by Felix's slithering tongue before she could finish her sentence. Time stopped when his lips met hers, but the flutter only intensified in Asna's heart. It pounded in her chest as legs gave in to the waves of pleasure coursing through her nerves. At this moment, she could only focus on how soft he felt against her mouth, how addictively he invaded all her senses. Although Felix was in a coma for 3 years, making him feel like he had seen Asna just a minute ago, there was still raw emotion in the way his fingers curled around hers and his soft breathing as he kissed her deeply. For half a century those two were having steamy and passionate moments on almost daily basis. Yet, neither one of them had grown bored of it or felt any differently about each other. In fact, their relationship had grown as close as Felix's hands to Asna's perfect breasts. With a single motion, his hand had slipped through her pajamas from her waist and gently caressed and fondled them like he was dealing with a precious fragile treasure. After fondling them to his heart content, Felix's fingers reached out to her cute but firm pink nipple and squeezed it ever so gently. Felix had received an immediate feedback to his touch as Asna had released a soft moan after her lips were spared for a split second. While they were having such a loving and intimate moment, the other tenants had deadpan expressions while they were doing their own things, appearing like they had absolutely no clue what was going on inside Asna's mansion. Alas, they just had to have super hearing. "The weather is sure great today," Thor expressed as he eyed the dimensional pocket's clear sky while chugging alcohol like there was no tomorrow. "Off. It sure is, my friend, it sure is." Hormungandr sighed as he recalled Asna's shyness. Half a century was enough to kill something like that, especially when Felix was too shameless to care about having an audience. Chapter 991 Rumors of his death and their repercussion. While Felix was eating the forbidden apple, tension began to arise in the Milky Way due to the Federation and Bardo Empire. Half a year had passed on the outside universe. It might look like not much, but it was enough to make almost all royal dragons assume that Felix had died in the dimensional pocket. Although the royal dragons were banned from mentioning Felix or anything related to the dimensional pocket at the moment, almost everyone else had picked up their pessimistic view on this uncanny situation. Right now, the majority of the people all across the universe were considering Felix to be dead as well, simply due to how the royal dragons were behaving. Naturally, this had caused the royal family to face the music of their silence as the network kept bombarding them with insults, curses, and confirmation questions. The royal family turned a deaf ear to the backlash and simply waited for everyone to forget about Felix. While Felix's fans were holding hope that their lord couldn't be killed in such an underwhelming manner, the upper echelon of the Milky Way galaxy were beyond pleased by the news, especially the Bardo Empire. Felix's death meant that his 90 million army of void creatures would finally be removed from on top of their heads like a judgment sword. They ought to feel glad by his death, since his army was making them unable to retaliate against the Federation poaching attempts on their important backgrounds. The Federation's promises and true democratic system was quite alluring for all backgrounds around the galaxy, especially when the inner trades, armies, public transportations, and free public services between allies made everyone to prosper together. In addition, they had a close partnership with the Guardian Empire and the Void Guild, helping them reduce the cost of hiring soldiers and mercenaries on trades between those two territories. The most critical lure was the fact that most influential human in the history of the universe was the indirect leader and guardian of the Federation. In other words, no one would dare lift his weight on other allies when there was a terrifying boss, supervising everyone and making sure that no one gets bullied. This had caused many of the Bardo Empire's allies to defect. After all, the Bardo Empire might be the first believed democratic empire with a council made out of origin bloodliners, but they were oppressive to backgrounds without an origin bloodliner amidst them. So, it was only democratic to those in power, and the rest could only watch as most of their empire's resources get shared between the upper echelon while leaving them the crumbles. Unfortunately for the Bardo Empire, their democratic beliefs and confidence in their empire's excellence had made them avoid erecting strict and slave-like contracts for the backgrounds in their territory. In the past, they knew that no one would bother choosing the Mariana Empire due to the royal family's incompetence and disorderly territory. As for the Guardian Empire, it wasn't even a choice with the void creatures running amok. Right now, they could only watch as their territories were shrinking without daring to lift a finger because of Felix's deterrence. Everything had changed the moment the royal dragons started assuming him to be dead. The smooth sailing of the Federation had started to face some light waves from the Bardo Empire and also a few ambitious and greedy internal backgrounds. Madame Zazia, we have received intel that the third councilman had paid a personal visit to planet Dracaris and convinced the four-headed Night Sparrow Nation to not jump boats. Even the Night Sparrows? Sigh, they are really taking advantage of our internal problems to retain their territories. Madame Zazia massaged her puffy eyelids with clear exhaustion signs all over her face. She was sitting in her desk with hundreds of small holographic screens around her, each displaying a different kind of report or news. Should I call a meeting to deal with this? Her assistants asked from the middle holographic screen. Just let them have it. We have enough problems internally. Madame Zazia waved her hand in rejection. She understood that it would be extremely difficult to win them back when the Bardo Empire had sent the third councilman, especially when the Federation wasn't in its best shape at the moment. If 6 months of absence was enough to halt our development and for bad apples to emerge, I don't even know what's going to happen if Felix has really died. Madame Zazia smiled bitterly as she tapped her finger on the disc. Only now did she realize that Felix's existence was the true backbone of the Federation, even if he was hands-free on the Federation's advancement. If half a year had caused the Bardo Empire to fight back in the political scene and for greedy internal leaders to start searching for more profit, then it meant that the Federation Council was still lacking respect and authority. After all, no one would dare to pull the same crap in the Bardo Empire even when they had no one like Felix. Their councilmen were enough to install fear and respect. That's why even when the Federation kept inciting the big dogs of the Bardo Empire to switch sides, they didn't even flinch. Madame Zazia knew that she could easily take control of everything by telling everyone that Felix was still alive and wouldn't be returning until another half a year. But she would rather not break his trust since he had explicitly asked her in the email to keep the information to herself. At the moment only her and Maganda Chief knew that Felix was still alive in the dimensional pocket. Felix had anticipated that turmoil would be emerging due to his absence and didn't want to his territory being a complete mess. We have 6 months more before he returns. Madame Zazia narrowed her eyes coldly. I might as well help more worms to see the sunlight. Madame Zazia knew that it would be difficult for her to control the council when hundreds of leaders were in it. So, instead of wasting her time trying to save the Federation from falling into a much serious internal infighting, she would rather chill in the shadows and help those greedy and destructive backgrounds to expose themselves. When Felix finally emerges, she would pounce and make them regret their decision. As for the Bardo Empire, she could only hope that they wouldn't increase their pace in the next 6 months. Back in the White Clan Palace, Selphie and Anastasia could be seen standing in front of White Mountain's wide-open gate. Are you sure about this? Anastasia asked as she eyed Selphie in her royal ambassador's attire, standing in front of sophisticated green spaceship. Yes. Selphie nodded with a serious expression. All right, have a safe trip sis and make sure to visit often. Anastasia sighed and went forward to hug Selfie. You wish, it's your turn now. Selfie smiled, I will be waiting for you at Furlund. I will pay you a visit when the world tree change its season. Anastasia promised with a faint smile, I can't miss such a breathtaking sight again. I will hold you to that. Selfie detached from the hug and walked back to her spaceship. After standing on the door, she waved her hand at Anastasia one last time before the door closed and spaceship took off to space. In a short while, the small green spaceship reached space and entered an enormous blue starship that was accompanied by an entire fleet. As the only heir of the 9 elven realms, there was no way Selfie would be sent alone to another galaxy even if it was a Carius galaxy. I apologize for leaving without saying goodbye. But, I can't afford to be left behind by you. Selfie murmured as she eyed the capital planet Zuham getting smaller and smaller from the window. Chapter 992 Attempting to learn lightning transmutation. Just like Madame Zazia, she also received the email from Mistress Candice about Felix's situation. So, she wasn't worried about him for the past 6 months, knowing that he was alive. At the start, she intended to wait for him to exit the dimensional pocket, but, she was summoned by Lady Yggdrasil to return and focus on her elemental runes. Before she could even reject it, she was told that Felix had spent half a century within the dimensional pocket doing nothing but training. He still had another half a century. Lady Yggdrasil brought the intel directly from Lady Sphinx, making her unable to doubt it even if she wanted. This was the first time she was hearing about the time difference, making her realize that when Felix leaves the dimensional pocket, he would be an entirely different man. A century was a considerable period even for her, hence, instead of wasting those 6 months waiting for him, she decided to head back and restart her runes training. It had been almost 5 years since she touched them. That's all because of her obsession and infatuation with Felix, making her unable to concentrate on her training. When it came to elemental runes, perfect concentration was a must. Naturally, she hadn't told Anastasia about any of this since both pieces of information were given to her in confidentiality. Selfie wasn't worried about not meeting Felix again after this. She knew that he was bound to pay a visit to the 9 realms eventually. After all, there was no way he was going to miss out on a free bath on their life essence fountain. A century of training, I can't even imagine how strong he will get. Felix had reached such surprising heights in less than 10 years if she didn't count his childhood. This kind of pressure made Selfie unable to sit still. She knew that if she fell behind, she would merely become a spectator in Felix's journey instead of being at his side. Although she got rejected many times by him and friend-zoned harshly, she would rather stay friends with him than turn into a spectator. God knows how many friends Felix had left behind him to watch his rise to glory. 25 years later in the dimensional pocket, Felix could be seen squinting his eyes in great focus at his right index finger while sitting on the mountain's summit. After a few minutes of staring at his finger without a single blink, Felix's pupil got narrowed at his nail starting to deconstruct into an electrical discharge. I did it, IF*ing did it. With an ecstatic expression, Felix kept yelling loudly while holding his finger tightly. Alas, the moment his concentration was broken, the electricity turned back into his nail. You idiot! Thor face-palmed, couldn't you hold it for another second? Give him a break. Asna defended Felix with a happy expression, he has been practicing your damned lightning transmutation for past decade without any results. I told him that it's too soon for him. Thor shrugged his shoulders. In the past 25 years, Felix had hit many other milestones in his development. First, he had managed to master the 3rd stage of gemstone manipulation, which proved to be much easier because of his previous experiences. Second, he had increased his gemstone manipulation range to 1 kilometer, finally balancing his 3 elements. Third, he started practicing with using 2 elements simultaneously and making some progress in it. Because there was no one in the known universe with 2 elemental manipulations, it was an unexplored realm and Felix had to find his own footing without help from his masters. As an example of how difficult it was, Felix could barely control 2 different elemental abilities simultaneously at the moment. This kind of control was entirely separate from creating 2 abilities one after the other and merging them like the sniper railgun rings. What Felix was seeking to master was the power to manipulate all of his elements at the same time, making it possible to merge abilities during their creation. That's truly a major milestone that he had yet to touch. When he got bored or stalled in a single training, Felix decided to move on to the advanced elemental abilities of primogenitors, such as True Poison Army, Parasitic Discharge, Elemental Transmutation, and more dangerous abilities. He started with Lightning Transmutation because of his previous experience with it. Alas, it proved to be much more difficult to learn than he anticipated. As Asna mentioned, it took Felix at least 3 hours of daily grinding for the past decade to merely transmute his nail for a split second even with Thor's help. Such an abysmal improvement was enough to make anyone give up. Are you planning to give up on it now? Thor asked after Felix finally settled down. Hell no. Felix's eyes brightened, this just fired me to put more time in it to master it. Felix knew that when he possessed electrical transmutation before, he didn't bring it to its full potential. It still pained him that he had to let it go so soon without making the best of it. He saw how Thor was using it to teleport from a lightning bolt to another inside a thunderstorm. During their spar, he played him to death because of it. This while he wasn't even using the true terror of transmutation. It was the fact that he could transmute objects and even living beings to electricity as well. As you wish. Thor smiled, just know that it will take you more than a couple of decades to truly master it and transmute your entire body freely and instantaneously. I am cool with that. Felix smirked, if I managed to master it, I will be able to master other elemental transmutations in half the time. This was the true reason Felix prioritized transmutation over other advanced abilities. It was an ability that could be applied to every element unlike parasitic discharge or something else. Without further ado, Felix returned to his position and tried to capture the same feeling of turning his nail into electricity. The concept was quite elementary as he was told by Thor that he needed to envision his body to be made out of lightning particles. Unfortunately, the application was nowhere as simple. As the first step had already taken Felix more than 5 years to learn, that was seeing the lightning particles without needing to close his eyes. Before, Felix always closed his eyes and sensed the lightning particles around him, but now? He actually had to see them with his eyes, which made Felix almost give up many times. Fortunately, he had God of Thunder as his master, giving him tips and advices each time he was stuck. The advice he gave him was to manifest millions of electrical discharges throughout his entire body first. This did the trick and assisted Felix in finally being able to spot a couple of lightning particles here and there. With time and repetition, the numbers increased until he was capable of seeing his entire body illuminating with lightning particles without needing to close his eyes. After freeing his body from the added electrical discharges, he was finally able to see his own natural electrical discharges coursing through his nervous system. Unfortunately, this was where Felix had gotten stuck and couldn't envision his entire body made out of lightning particles. After all, he had to envision his blood, flesh, skin, fat, organs, and even bones to be made out of lightning particles. The only reason he managed to pull it off and turn his nail into electricity was because of Thor, forcing him to spend all of his time on envisioning only his nail and ignoring the rest. In addition, he received help by adding new electrical discharges, which acted as way to fool his mind that his entire nail was merely lightning particles stacked. Unfortunately, Felix was unable to repeat the same result even when he followed the same steps for the next 2 hours. Damn, it was really just lucky strike. Felix scratched his cheek with a disappointed smile. Continue to grind, and you will be able to use it at will eventually. Thor encouraged him. I hope so. Felix decided to give it a rest for today and focus on other matters. However, the moment he stopped his training, Lady Sphinx took the opportunity to inform him calmly, I have managed to find 3 new methods that can help you utilize Ymir's heart. This was more than enough to make everyone drop everything and focus on her. Felix didn't hesitate to enter the consciousness space and join their table, he had waited for this moment for more than 75 years now. Please do tell Master, he requested with a serious expression. Chapter 993 The 3 Methods and Their Perks. The first method requires you to eat Ymir's heart in a consistent manner for the next 6 months while following a specific cooking recipe I have created. Lady Sphinx disclosed. Eat. Felix glanced at Ancestor Ymir while feeling somewhat uncomfortable by the notion of eating his heart while he was hanging around them. Don't look at me. Ancestor Ymir shrugged his shoulders. It doesn't concern me what you do with my heart as long as it helps you in your journey of dealing with those beings. Ancestor Ymir already knew that Lady Sphinx would be mentioning to feast on his heart. As a supreme being, he knew that the easiest and most efficient way of benefiting from his heart was devouring it. Though, her method wasn't as straightforward. What kind of benefits will he get? Asna inquired. This method will ensure that Felix will obtain most of the benefits from the heart. Lady Sphinx paused. Based on my experiments, you will be getting at minimum a boost of physical strength reaching up to 50 kbf as well as immunity to fire. That much? Felix's eyes widened in disbelief at such a crazy enhancement. It might not seem that much when considering that the heart belonged to the first dragon to be born, but Felix knew that it was quite insane. That's because he had already crossed past the 100 kbf, making every single enhancement take a major hit. He knew that if he consumed the heart while he had only 20k or less, he would have been pushed past 100k in the blink of an eye. Even Prince Domino could barely cross past 150k while he was enraged, and he had one of the purest bloodlines. So, 50k boost was a large sum, which would help greatly in his development. Don't forget about fire immunity. Thor mentioned, if it was any other dragon's heart, you will never obtain it unless you worked insanely hard for it. Fire immunity is really a great bonus. Felix nodded in agreement. With fire immunity, dragons would pose no real dangers to him anymore unless they fought him physically or abused their nukes. Though, you will not be getting the dragon's cultivation system in this manner. Hormungandr shook his head. It's a great flat-out enhancement, but it's nothing compared to what an entire cultivation system can do. Everyone nodded in agreement. What about the second method? Felix asked, shelving the first method for now. The second method is a bit unorthodox, but I have tested it countless times and was met with positive results. Lady Sphinx shared, we will turn the heart into a solution with a dozen of unique materials, Felix will bathe in it. A solution? Thor raised an eyebrow in surprise. None of them had expected that Lady Sphinx would be bold enough to melt and merge Ymir's heart with other materials for Felix to bathe in them. They couldn't imagine what kind of benefits would be obtained from such method, especially when eating the heart provide a much better flat-out enhancements. I understand your skepticism. Lady Sphinx clarified, the solution won't provide Felix with the cultivation system, but it will help him get something somewhat similar. It's easier to show you. Lady Sphinx waved her hand and manifested 9 different and colorful brilliant gemstones in Felix's body with the grey fog. Then, she pushed those gemstones towards Felix's body. 2 attached themselves on top of his shoulders. 3 merged with his shoulder blades in a straight line. Another 3 linked with his upper chest in a straight line as well. The last one got glued between his chest pecs. Those are the royal gemstones with each different unique attribute. Lady Sphinx explained, by merging with those gemstones and bathing into the solution for merely 3 days, all of your elements and future elements will be given those attributes. Hey! How is that possible? You can do that? Felix and the tenants were all left stunned and somewhat doubtful. In their eyes, it was somewhat crazy to think that the attributes of sacred flames could be transferred into other elements. It's more than possible. It's doable. Ancestor Ymir was the one answering their doubts. Before they could react, he explained it. In this universe, only Madame Phoenix truly can control flames in all of its variations. As for us dragons, we are required the royal gemstones to obtain those attributes. I was born with 9 royal gemstones while the other 9 first dragons were born with just 1. For our descendants, to get those royal gemstones, they need pure bloodline from us. Ancestor Ymir shared, if their bloodlines are thin, they hatch from their eggs as a basic red dragon without it or a tiny one incapable of switching the nature of their sacred flames. With my technique, I enabled those red dragons to absorb the properties of the royal gemstones and hopefully unlock their own. Everyone nodded in understanding after he simplified it. Princess Kotses was desperate for bloodline treasures in the ceremony for this reason. Her clan had already gathered plenty, but she wanted to get more for the sake of morphing into a dragon with different attributed sacred flames than the others. In other words, the royal gemstones merely give out different attributes instead of requiring sacred flames as the base. Lady Sphinx concluded, this in turn can help Felix make his lightning and other elements to cause soul burn, healing, corrosion, deconstruction, and more effects. Upon hearing so, Felix's heart started pumping faster and faster in agitation and excitement. He couldn't imagine the thought of obtaining those wonderful attributes on his original elements without needing to use Phoenix's bloodline. To make matters even better, this would give him an edge over the original primogenitors. Think about it, even Thor was unable to make his lightning burn the souls of his opponents. This is still not all. Lady Sphinx smiled, you will be capable of utilizing Ymir's technique to absorb other royal gemstones and increase your overall strength. Now we are talking. Hormungandr smiled with a pleased expression. Everything that he heard about the second method was spectacular, but as a realist, he recognized that it didn't offer the true important benefits. Physical enhancement or a way to increase it, what's the point of having attributed elements if his physical strength was lacking? I guess your student ain't getting the heart. Thor grinned at Fenrir, teasing him a bit. Fenrir flicked him a middle finger expressionlessly. Hee, don't be salty. Thor chuckled, our Sphinx is just too good at what she does. Do we even need to hear the third method? Felix rubbed his palms in eagerness, already made up his mind to choose this method. In his eyes, nothing could top this method since it offered everything that he wanted and more. Hold your horses. Lady Sphinx smiled faintly, I always leave the best for last. Upon hearing so, everyone's eyes widened a little. They knew that Lady Sphinx's wisdom transcends dimensions, but if she truly managed to top even this method, they would honestly start to worship her intelligence. The third method isn't as secured as the previous ones. However, if we pulled it off. Lady Sphinx smirked a little, you will be getting the cultivation system, as well as the perks from the other 2 methods. This was enough to silence everyone and stare at Lady Sphinx with stunned looks. All 3 benefits at once? Didn't that mean he would be getting fire immunity, an insane boost to his physical strength, attributed elements, ability to absorb royal gemstones, and most importantly, even the lost dragon cultivation system? Such a significant power up from just 1 heart. Don't get your hopes up though. Lady Sphinx lowered their expectations, there is a low chance of pulling it off. In addition, it's extremely risky and heavily reliant on luck. Honestly, I don't advise Felix going for it. Our hopes are already up, just out with it. Thor rushed her. Remember when I told you that it's impossible for a human to possess 3 hearts? Lady Sphinx dropped a bombshell on them. Well, I have found that it's possible if his internal system got rearranged naturally to support the 3rd heart. The only way available is to have him integrate with Kraken bloodline. The Kraken. Hormungandr and Thor glanced at each other with widened eyes before speaking at once. How did we forget? That unkillable cockroach has more than 10 hearts. Upon hearing so, everyone immediately understood that Lady Sphinx was betting on Felix to obtain a mutation capable changing his interior system to support more hearts instead of external mutations. It's impossible. Felix proclaimed, I have never heard of another bloodliner having his entire internal system get rearranged by a mere mutation. It was already hard to obtain external mutations with integration. As for internal mutations, there were some cases of some bloodliners having their throats, bones, or single organs mutated to support some freaky abilities. What Lady Sphinx had mentioned was nowhere close to those exceptions. She wanted to mutate Felix's entire internal system, which implied, his bones, organs, flesh, bloodstream, and nervous system would undergo a somewhat complete morphosis. This shouldn't even be called a mutation anymore but an evolution. Chapter 994, The Land of Natural Treasures. It's quite dangerous and depends heavily on luck, but it's possible. Lady Sphinx informed, I did many experiments, where I make your copy integrate with the Kraken's bloodline from 15% to 30%. The results as such. Lady Sphinx manifested an Excel sheet that had different percentages in one side and the success percentage on the other. After reading the sheet, Felix couldn't help but take a deep cold breath in fear. Who could blame him? It was written that the success rate from 10% to 15% was 0%. From 15% to 20% was 1%/2%/3%/4%/5%. Only after crossing 20% were the chances increased significantly as they had reached 20% plus. If you want the highest chance with the biggest possibility of survivability, I suggest 25%. Lady Sphinx shared. Absolutely not. Asna shook her head vehemently, he barely survived 15% in the previous replacement. Now, he needs to jump straight to 25%? His corpse wouldn't even be found. I agree. Thor frowned, 25% is just too high. It's too much of a risk. Hormungandr nodded. That's why I advised Felix to reconsider choosing the other two options. Lady Sphinx said, I know it's tempting to obtain all perks, but they won't be useful if you are dead. It seemed like everyone was against attempting this suicide mission. If I succeeded, I will have 30% chance of getting the mutation. Those odds aren't so big. Boink. No is no. Asna scolded as she hit Felix in the head with her knuckles after hearing his thoughts. She was always supportive of his decisions, but this was different. She was certain that Felix wouldn't make it out alive if he made such a drastic jump in the integrated percentage. Felix decided to ease her worries. I am not that cocky in my pain tolerance to pull something this crazy, but I also have enough time in the world to boost my body limitations and train in the UVR to prepare for it. In Felix's mind, he could practice the integration in the UVR by increasing it gradually from 15% to 25%. While he was doing so, he would increase his body limitations, which in turn would help out his pain tolerance significantly. After all, his strength determined what kind of percentage he could pull off. If it wasn't for so, he would have never gone beyond 1%. Well, he is somewhat right. Carbuncle supported Felix casually, if he can't pull it off in the UVR, he can give up on it and choose the second method. Are you sure about this? Asna asked with a concerned tone. It might seem like no harm was done, but Asna understood that Felix would go through an agonizing pain each time he trained. I have to take my chances. Felix smiled gently, such extraordinary opportunities aren't around the corner. If I went for the second best option every time it gets tough, how am I supposed to reach the top and protect you? Felix recognized that the gap between him and those beings was simply a chasm that stretched for galaxies. He doubted if he could even bridge it while taking advantage of every opportunity before him, but if he missed them, he was certain that it wasn't happening. You idiot, I just want you to be safe. Asna sighed bitterly. And I want you to be free. Felix replied with a faint chuckle, my promise proceed yours, so you have no say in it. Upon hearing so, Asna's expression turned soft and stopped bothering him with this matter. If you are truly attempting to go for it, I advise you to reach at least the 10th mark before exiting the dimensional pocket. Lady Sphinx said. The 10th mark. Felix raised his eyebrows, I am still a bit far from the 7th mark while I have spent more than 6 years in a coma. How long will that take? I have already calculated it in mind. Lady Sphinx replied instantly, it's between 2 decades and 3 decades. No wonder you mentioned the 10th mark. Thor said, if he entered a coma now to push straight towards the 10th mark, he will be slumbering for the remaining period in the dimensional pocket. More or less. Lady Sphinx confirmed. Isn't that a bit much? Felix eyed Asna with an uncomfortable expression, not feeling too good about leaving Asna on her own for such a long period. Sleeping for an entire 2 decades or more was certainly something that didn't cross his mind at this point. But, he also understood that Lady Sphinx had some sense in her advice. There were a few available options to increase his physical strength without requiring integration. Felix knew that he could take advantage of the life essence fountain, but it wasn't enough. That's because the fountain enhances his strength in all departments. At the moment, he required only physical enhancement to pull off the integration with the Kraken bloodline. Don't worry about me. Asna smiled charmingly, it's easy for me to enter a long slumber as well. Upon hearing so, Felix stopped hesitating at once. If Asna was cool with it, there was no need to dilly-dally any longer. As for the primogenitors, they wouldn't be bothered even if Felix slept for an entire century. Decades were like minutes for such beings. In the case of Nimmo, he had Mistress Candace to spend the time within the dimensional pocket as she had returned after delivering the items. I wanted to teach you more about lightning, but this is for the better. Thor smiled, you have already spent enough time learning about 3 elements. You need a break to digest everything you have been taught. Agreed. Hormungandr nodded. Felix had almost removed most of his elemental weaknesses during the past 75 years. Now, he just needed to continue expanding his external range and spend time on his advanced abilities. Though, I doubt I have enough natural treasures to hit the 10th mark. Felix shared as he checked his natural treasures inventory. There were still a few hundreds B and A graded natural treasures, but he knew that they were barely enough to reach half the 7th mark. After each mark, the natural treasures requirement double. In other words, if he was required 300 B graded to hit 6th mark, he needed 600 to hit the 7th, and 1200 to hit the 8th. As for the 10th mark, he would be short of 4800 B graded natural treasures. It was insanity just to think about the future required amount to reach the 30th mark. Naturally, with the quality increasing, the amount required get lowered significantly. Have you forgotten about your location? Ancestor Ymir chuckled, this is the land of natural treasures, and I know a couple of spots where you can harvest even S-graded natural treasures. Felix's eyes brightened up at the sound of that. With Ancestor Ymir's help, he could easily clean the entire dimensional pocket of its best natural treasures in less than a week. I am under your care. Felix bowed his head respectfully. Try to keep up. Ancestor Ymir exited the consciousness space and started teleporting to east. Felix followed him closely. In less than 30 seconds, they reached a small field of white flowers that was hidden inside a pocket within a mountain. Ancestor Ymir had to open an entrance forcefully as there wasn't any to access the field. Pure azalas! Felix exclaimed in excitement after realizing the flowers' identity. Although they were B-graded, there was an entire field of them. With the first glance, anyone would guess that there were hundreds planted here. Harvest them quick, we have more stops to hit. Ancestor Ymir said while sitting on Felix's shoulder. Good thing I have an army. Felix smirked while summoning tens of small pink golems. He didn't even use his gemstone golem's ability as he had already reached a high level of gemstone manipulation to create them with any size he wanted. Felix bestowed intelligence on them with the root gemstone and ordered, harvest the flowers as gently as possible. The army of cute pink smurfs nodded in understanding and started working hard. Leave them here and follow me. Ancestor Ymir disclosed, I have another nearby spot less than a kilometer away. Without hesitation, Felix chased after him, knowing that his little golems wouldn't disappear unless he went past 1 kilometer in range. With the root gemstone, he could feel their presence and even see through their eyes whenever he wanted. In less than a week, Felix had cleaned out the entire dimensional pocket of S/A/B graded natural treasures. It was effortless when he was being guided by the god of the dimensional pocket. I have more than 2000 B graded, 500 A graded, and 50 S graded natural treasures. Felix grinned widely as he stared at his packed inventory. This is enough to go past the 10th mark. Chapter 995 Origin Realm is the only way forward. Now that he had enough, Felix prepared for the inedible feast. He knew that it would be difficult to eat everything without tiring himself out or his stomach not able to handle it. I have to turn everything into one big smoothie and drink it in my giant form. Felix felt disgusted just by the thought. Too bad, it was the only way forward. Felix got to work by manifesting a towering mortar made out of white adamantine. Then, he jumped on top of it and sat at the edge. Be fast to not waste their beneficial properties, Lady Sphinx warned. I will try. Felix nodded and started beaming large containers. Because he didn't have enough to hold a single natural treasure in one container, he packed a dozen in each one. In a swift manner, Felix kept emptying the containers inside the crystal glass like he was dumping garbage. The natural treasure continued to stack against each other until the crystal mortar was half full. Then, he poured some clean water to facilitate the mixture process. Next, Felix created a giant white pestle and enlarged his body until he was able to hold it easily in one hand. Felix started grinding the natural treasures together while sitting in a mediation position with the mortar in his lap. He kept doing so for more than 2 minutes until the natural treasures and water were turned into a gooey black substance. He must have lost at least 10% of the beneficial properties. Thor commentated as he eyed the revolting mixture. That's a manageable percentage. Lady Sphinx replied, knowing that it was impossible to not lose anything after brutalizing those natural treasures. After Felix was done, he scraped the bottom of the pestle and pushed the leftovers back to the mortar. Then, he picked up the mortar with his eyes and nose closed shut. Here we go. Without dilly-dallying, Felix placed the mortar near his mouth and started gulping down the black smoothie non-stop. It didn't take long before his expression started twisting like he was drinking the most horrible and disgusting concoction to the known universe. Still, Felix toughened through the nausea and emptied the entire mortal in his stomach, knowing that every drop count forced Felix to lick the bowl clean even when tears were about to fall down. Never again, ... Thud. Immediately after he finished, his eyes rolled to the back of his head and fell face first to the ground. The mortar and pestle disappeared after Felix began his slumber, but his giant size remained the same. Good thing he learned to automate his poison conversion technique. Hormungandr smiled. In the past 75 years, Felix had paid a visit to his poison conversion technique to hone it even better. After all, just because the inscriptions had approved of him, it didn't mean that he had completely mastered the conversion technique. Making his subconscious absorb the neutral energy and convert it into poison energy was one of them. Naturally, it wasn't going to be as good as doing it consciously, but it was enough to sustain his giant size until his stomach manages to digest everything into energy. Immer, if you will. Lady Sphinx requested. Be at ease, I will take care of him. Ancestor Immer used his powers to create a cocoon around Felix made out of vines and leaves. Then, he pushed the clouds to give Felix some shade. The vines were moist and kept Felix's skin wet. This was enough to support Felix's water intake for the next 2 decades since his body was capable of absorbing it effectively through the pores. You're already planning to sleep? Thor raised an eyebrow in surprise after seeing Asna, heading back to her mansion. Yep, wake me up when he opens his eyes. Asna expressed calmly. Have good dreams. Hormungandr smiled kindly. There was no way Asna was going to spend another day while Felix was absent, especially, when she had just waited for 3 years, and he ended up slumbering again after a week. Since he was stubborn on seeking strength, she could only adapt to his schedule. Now that the kids are asleep, what should we do? Thor wondered. Don't bother me, I want to read in peace. Lady Sphinx snapped her finger and teleported back to her pyramid. Carbuncle was chilling on his own as always, not giving a damn about anything as long as he had his joints. This left the Asgardian faction and Mistress Candace. How about you show us your students' progress? Thor requested from Fenrir, wanting to ease his boredom with anything. I am interested as well. Jormungandr said. Having nothing to lose, Fenrir manifested a mirror that displayed his main consciousness perspective. Oh ho? You morphed him? I guessed you will go for it. Thor expressed after seeing Noah's new appearance. He now resembled a winter wolf and werewolf combined more than a human. He was 3 meters tall and had half of his skin completely covered in snow-white fur. He had long dark sharp claws protruding from his nails and dreadful blue wolfish eyes. At the moment, he could be seen fighting against a gigantic blue troll with an icy cudgel. I had to, there aren't many options to help him increase his strength. Fenrir admitted. Still, getting turned by you personally must have given him a massive boost. Thor said. He knew that werewolves and winter wolves with pure bloodline were capable of turning some races into half-werewolves. Though, the list of races and werewolves capable of doing so were extremely short, humans being one of the most adaptive races in the universe were naturally part of the list. The pure vampires were capable of achieving the same if they allowed another race to drink their blood while they were drinking theirs. Naturally, such a genetic modification was quite risky, especially for people with an already modified genes. Fortunately for Noah, he was turned by the ancestor of wolves himself, which removed any kind of risk to the transformation. At the moment, Noah could be counted to be a half-werewolf but possess much purer bloodline than the werewolves and winter wolves. I wonder if Felix can benefit from the strength enhancement if he got turned as well. Mistress Candace thought out loud. We haven't brought this up before because we didn't want him to be turned. Thor shook his head, sure the strength enhancement is astonishing, but he is already half-devourer. We should not mess with his genetics too much unless the results are just too good to be ignored. Being turned into a half-werewolf might be decent for others, but in the case of Felix? He needed just the best of the best. Looks like you have done more than just turn him. Thor commentated after witnessing Noah decapitate the troll in one slash. Ice trolls were known to possess strength reaching 40 kbf at minimum when they hit adulthood. If their intelligence wasn't too lacking, they would have been considered to be ranked even higher than orcs and giants. For Noah to slice the troll's head in a single motion implied that he must have posses at least 50 kbf. That's only natural. Fenrir confirmed it. To have an alive and active primogenitor behind your back wasn't the same as having them as merely wisps of consciousness. Noah had an advantage over Felix for this as Fenrir could take him around the universe to areas, where he knew that there would an abundance of opportunities. Although Lady Sphinx was also alive, she didn't care too much about Felix's strength compared to his other two masters. I can already see that he will be hitting his limitation soon. Jormungandr inquired, what's your future plans for him? Fenrir remained quiet for a second before answering, I will find a way for him to enter the origin realm. I don't know why, but I have a feeling that humans' limitations gets broken after they cross that barrier. Well, your instincts are always on point. Thor scratched his beard as he doubted, but, I don't know about this one. If their limits gets unlocked, why all those so-called origin bloodliners stops getting stronger immediately after breaking through? Thor knew that humans must have tried almost everything in their powers to develop a new cultivation system or a new path forward after the origin realm. He was completely right, humans' ambition could never let them settle down in one place for too long. Unfortunately, they had tried all options to no avail, they even involved the metal race. No one was capable of opening a new path forward for origin bloodliners even when they were at their strongest and freest period of their lives. What other choice do I have? Fenrir said composedly, Origin realm is the only way forward. Chapter 996, A Century of Growth for Nimmo. 19 years later. If your boy doesn't wake up in the next 2 years, I will be forced to kick him out while he is asleep. Ancestor Ymir disclosed while playing chess with Lady Sphinx, my mental energy is on the verge of exhaustion. Don't worry. Lady Sphinx replied calmly while moving up a pawn, he will be waking up in a few days. How are you so sure? Thor asked from afar. He has lost 10% or so of the natural treasure's benefits, this should have reduced the time of absorption. Makes sense. As Lady Sphinx anticipated, Felix's eyelids started making movement at first light of the next day. After a few moments, Felix opened his muddled eyes and started looking around him with a cloudy vision, not able to focus on a single object. To make matters worse, he felt like body didn't belong to him. He kept ordering his head to turn around, but it refused to budge. What a shitty feeling. Irritated, Felix mewed in his mind and gave up trying to move. He knew that slumbering for such a long time had caused his limbs to stiffen and his nervous system to shut down temporarily. Haha, if you are complaining about this after 2 decades, I don't know how you will react if you have entered the same slumbers as us. Thor laughed after seeing Felix's inability to stand up. I have a feeling that I will be joining your sleep schedule eventually. Felix sighed at the thought of needing 2 decades to reach the 10th mark. He didn't even want to imagine how many years he would need for the next marks. Welcome back, kiddo. Carbuncle greeted with a sleepy expression. Thanks, Elder. Felix asked, how long was I asleep for? About 19 years. Lady Sphinx replied. That's shorter than I thought. Felix raised an eyebrow in surprise. You haven't absorbed 100% of the natural treasure's benefits. No wonder. Felix inquired, where is Asna? Is she asleep? It was quite weird for her B*TCHY voice to not be the first thing he hears after opening his eyes. She went into slumber a few moments after you. She has been sleeping ever since. Thor informed. Don't wake her up. Felix grinned wickedly, I will do it. The tenant's eyelids twitched, knowing that he was up to no good. In a short while, Felix's muscles were finally relieved from the tenseness of being inactive for a whole 2 decades. If it was a normal human, it was doubtful if he could even walk properly after months of physical therapy. Without further ado, Felix emerged from the cocoon fully nude like he had just gone into rebirth. Felix blocked his eyes from the sunlight and kept them squinted due to their high sensitivity. He threw some clothes on him and sat next to the cocoon. At least it was worth it. Felix smirked faintly after sensing that his strength been enhanced to the point he could feel it without even testing it out. Before he entered the dimensional pocket he had 116 kbf and was at the 6th mark. Now that he had reached the 10th mark, his bloodline force had been increased to a generous 146k. He was officially stronger than the youngest generation of the dragons, including Prince Domino. Though, not as much if he entered his enraged state. Just as Felix wanted to enter his consciousness space, Nimmo appeared out of nowhere and collided with his chest. Easy there. Felix chuckled as he picked up Nimmo and rubbed his face with his soft black fur. Nimmo started making giggling noises while trying to escape from Felix's grasp. Were you making trouble when I was asleep? Felix smiled. He was behaving properly. Mistress Candace defended Nimmo after she emerged from a void rift nearby. That's what I like to hear. Felix patted Nimmo with a pleased expression. He has been eating and growing quite well. Mistress Candace disclosed. What about his abilities? Felix inquired, did he unlock anything new? Before he entered this slumber, Nimmo had unlocked many abilities and techniques related to void laws. The process of unlocking those abilities was related to growth and age. Now that almost a century had gone by, Nimmo had stacked up many abilities. He did unlock new ones. Mistress Candace eyed Nimmo before confessing, however, they aren't related to void laws. Felix raised an eyebrow in surprise. Don't tell me. Yes, he finally started using the laws of sins. Mistress Candace confirmed with a fanatic look. Felix looked at Nemo's innocence but loving eyes and mewed, how can such a cutie control those evil powers? Have you guys already tested them? No. Mistress Candace smiled wryly, but, I saw Nemo using the lust powers to control some animals and force them to play tag with him. Felix didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the sound of that. Are you certain that he has used the sin's laws instead of just using his spiritual pressure? Felix wondered. I am certain. Mistress Candace said, I have the same powers after all. Felix didn't doubt her anymore after hearing so, as void succubus, she was also capable of using some abilities related to lust laws. Although she was capable of using the laws, she couldn't manipulate them or even understand how her abilities worked. The other unique void creatures were also the same. It was like they were bloodliners and the paragon of sins was the beast they get their abilities from. The only difference was that bloodliners have elemental abilities while unique void creatures possess law-based powers. If it wasn't for so, the paragon of sins wouldn't have been hit by one of the harshest punishments ever. Did he use any other sins besides lust? No. Mistress Candace shared, Nemo is still merely following his emotions instead of rationality. So far, nothing had affected him in a manner to use the other sins. I see. Felix nodded with a thoughtful expression. He truly had no clue why Nemo's intelligence hadn't matured much even though he spent an entire century growing. He assumed that Nemo would be capable of communication after a decade gone by. Alas, the only thing that had gotten bigger was his size. He might appear to be small and cute now, but Felix knew that his original size had already gone past 100 meters, he was bigger than dragons. If he had this size before he entered his slumber, God knows how big he had gotten now. Don't forget he is a unigen. He might have hatched from an egg unlike them, but he is still one. Lady Sphinx said. Upon being reminded of this fact, Felix realized that it was quite normal for Nemo to still have a child intelligence even though a century passed. He was told by Asna that the Unigen's 3 stages of maturity were unlike any other. In fact, anyone below millennial or so was still technically a child in their race. In other words, Nemo still had a long while until his intelligence resembles that of humans and surpass them. Is it wrong to hope that he stays like this forever? Felix mewed as he rubbed Nemo's tummy while listening to his happy chortle. Felix knew that Nemo would thoroughly change when he grew older and start to realize his position in the universe. He would rather have him remain as a cute raccoon-like creature than turn into the new paragon of sins. A few minutes later, Felix could be seen teasing Asna's perfect mounds while lying next to her in bed. Too bad, Asna's sleep was quite light, making her wake up in the first couple of seconds. What are you doing? She asked while staring straight at Felix's soul with a gentle smile. Giving you a well-needed massage, you must be stiff after sleeping for such a long period. Felix replied with a serious tone while still fondling her breasts, knowing that if he stopped or acted guilty, he would screw himself big time. Is that so? Asna giggled, let me give you a massage as well. Food. In the blink of an eye, Felix's jewels were struck by Asna's knee ferociously, making his eyeballs bulge out instantly. You witch! In a great deal of pain, Felix cursed while holding his crotch and rolling away from her. How mean, I just thought that your balls will be stiff as well. Asna chuckled as she stood up and walked towards her bathroom while wearing nothing underneath. Alas, Felix was in too much agony to bother focus on her bewitching curves and lustrous skin. Ka-thumb. Asna closed the door and started showering. Because both of them had slept and woke up at the same time, it felt like they were away from each other for merely a few minutes instead of entire 2 decades. So, there was not much affection shown as the last time. Some time later, everyone was gathered in a round table within the consciousness space. Boy, you have 2 years left. Ancestor Ymir sighed, I wish I was able to prolong it even more. Elder, please don't say so. You have already given me too much. Felix said with a grateful tone. It might look much in your eyes, but later in the future, you will realize that my contribution was nothing but a drop in the ocean. Ancestor Ymir smiled wryly. Maybe, but for now, I am beyond satisfied and grateful. Felix smiled back. Felix meant every single word. The time spent in this dimensional pocket had entirely changed the course of his life. Most of his weaknesses were either gone completely or reduced. Even Nemo benefited greatly from the time difference. I think we should spend another year here and leave after. Lady Sphinx suggested. It's never good to completely exhaust your mental energy. Chapter 997 Exiting the Dimensional Pocket. I don't mind really. Ancestor Ymir smiled kindly. I always sleep between cycles anyway. Still, it's best to avoid leaving you in such bad state. Thor looked at Mistress Candace and proposed, how about we exit through the Void Realm? This should save him some mental energy, and we can spend the last 2 years here. This was the most optimal option since using the backdoor exhaust Ancestral Ymir's mental energy based on each individual passed through it. Since the dimensional pocket was still connected with the matter universe because of the backdoor, the Void Realm could be used as connection point between the two realms. However, if it was closed, the dimensional pocket would be completely enclosed on itself without any ability to access other dimensions, Void Realm included. Let's do that. Felix agreed. It will be impolite to waste Elder's mental energy when we have other options. Everyone was on board with this suggestion, making Ancestor Ymir unable to change their minds. For the next 2 years, Felix did nothing more than spend quality time with Isna and Nemo. Occasionally, he would train adapting to his newfound strength and search for royal gemstones. He felt that it was better to relax and take it easy before he returned to the chaos. It was a great decision as those 2 years had pacified his heart and calmed his nerves that were always screaming at him to keep grinding non-stop. In addition, he had managed to collect more than 100 royal gemstones with the help of Ancestor Ymir. Whether he chose the second or last method, royal gemstones would be necessary to his cultivation. Felix knew that he could have gotten even more, but he wanted to avoid cutting off the lifeline of the dragon race. Ancestor Ymir was nothing but nice to him, and he would feel like crap if he abused his kindness. Plus, if he cleared the entire dimensional pocket, he was bound to be accused of doing so when the next cycle kicks off and the dragons find nothing but air. It would not be good to add the dragon race into his list of enemies. In the last day. I wish you all the best of luck in your journey. Ancestor Ymir patted Felix's shoulder as he offered kindly, remember, you are always welcome here. I will leave a back door specifically for you after the future ceremonies ends to avoid dealing with my descendants. Thank you, Elder, truly, I am forever in debt to your gifts. Felix expressed with a grateful tone while bowing deeply. If it wasn't impossible for Ancestor Ymir to leave the dimensional pocket, he would have offered him to join the party in his mind. At least, he wouldn't be so lonely and have like-minded beings to spend his time with. Alas, becoming a god of the dimensional pocket had its downfalls. After everyone said goodbyes to Ancestor Ymir, Felix exited the consciousness space and entered the Void Realm with Mistress Candace and Nemo. Felix turned around and waved his hand one last time at the ancestral wine jar that was hovering in front of the Void Rift. Then, he turned around and disappeared through the darkness, leaving the Void Rift to close up slowly. I am waiting patiently for the day you reach the peak, waiting patiently. Ancestor Ymir murmured one last time before the Void Rift completely closed off. A couple of hours later, Felix had finally arrived at the White Clan City. Their travel took a while since the Dimensional Gate wasn't near the capital planet Zuham at all. The Dimensional Gate merely acted as bridge to the pocket, which was in a complete different area of the galaxy. Since those hours spent within the Void Realm were after the Void Rift had been closed, they counted towards the matter universe. That's because time within the Void Realm was relative to the dimension it was connected to. In other words, if Felix opened a Void Rift and kept it open, the time he spends in the Void Realm would also be 100 times faster. However, if the bridge was lost, the time within the Void Realm would be relative to the matter universe since the realm was mirroring it. Candace, please open a void rift and keep Nemo with you for a little while. Felix requested. All right. After the void rift was opened, Felix swiftly exited it and unleashed his wings. VRRR VRRR. Immediately after, his AP bracelet went off with endless notifications popping out on his screen. Before Felix could read them, he heard Queen AI's monotonous voice resound in his mind. Network connection has been restored. Welcome back, Sir Felix. My queen, I have truly missed your sweet robotic voice. Felix smiled widely in delight after finally hearing Queen AI's voice. He had never gone this long in his 2 lives without hearing the reliable voice of Queen AI. Alas, Queen AI didn't share the same sentiment as she jumped straight to the contracts issue. Sir Felix, you have been offline for more than a year while you have active binding contracts. She informed. I know. Felix replied calmly, I believe that everyone in the universe knows that I have been trapped against my will inside a dimensional pocket without any connection to the network. If you want to send an investigation squad to get further information, I don't mind cooperating. Queen AI went quiet for a few seconds before announcing, since your connection has been established and that no contract has been broken in your absence, I declare that you are free from further investigation. Thank you. Felix smiled faintly. Felix was never worried about getting in trouble with the Alliance for breaking the 2 hours rule since he had a legit reason that was backed by the public. Because he had returned, and no contracts were broken, there was no need for Queen AI to send an investigation squad to dig even further. Queen AI always checks first before involving the investigation squads. After all, they were a bunch of scary hunters, who were tasked with locating the contract breakers and checking whether they did it willingly or not. If Felix had lost connection without anyone seeing him, they would have been definitely sent in his direction. Looks like a lot has happened when I was gone. Felix mewed after checking on the notifications. There were messages left by Selfie, Madame Zazia, Anastasia, and even Prince Domino had left one. Just like he had received those notifications, the moment he got online, almost everyone else close to him or had a contract with him were alerted. He is finally out. Clan head Kirsoon exclaimed with a shocked expression after seeing the notification pop up. He is actually still alive even after an entire century inside. Quickly, call him over before the other clans hears about this. The White Clan courtroom had descended into chaos abruptly at the news. No one doubted its legitimacy since Felix had 2 contracts with them. In other words, his online status was always known to them until the contract get closed. This was how they were certain that Felix was still stuck in the dimensional pocket instead of getting out of the back door and hiding somewhere else. No need to call for me. Suddenly, Felix emerged from a void rift above the top rail of a chair and sat on it with a composed expression. Everyone was too stunned by Felix's entry, they quietened down immediately. I apologize for being late, but I came to get what was I promised. Felix smiled. Hold on a second, Dragon Slayer. An official narrowed his eyes at Felix and expressed, you can't expect to get what you want after barging in like this without a single explanation on why you stayed that long in the dimensional pocket. The rest of the officials all shared the same displeased expression. Honestly, they weren't really mad about Felix's disrespectful entry but the troubles he had caused them due to his prolonged stay in the dimensional pocket. Sure, he had brought the White Clan the victory, but they weren't able to even celebrate it or rub it in the other clans' faces because of all the attention being on him. No one cared anymore about the winner of the ceremony when a human was stuck for more than a year/a century inside the dimensional pocket. To make matters worse for them, the other 3 clans gave them crap for causing all of this by recruiting a troublesome human. I know that I must have caused you some issues, and I am sorry about that. Felix shrugged his shoulders, but, it wasn't my fault. Your ancestor is a friend of my master Lady Sphinx, and he kept me inside to catch up with her. Felix didn't hesitate to put the blame on Ancestor Emir, knowing that not a single dragon was bold enough to question their ancestors' decisions. Felix had already received permission from Ancestor Ymir to use him as a shield, knowing that Felix would be in big trouble otherwise. After all, he had spent an entire century inside their precious sacred grounds and came back alive. The first thought every dragon would have was, how many bloodline treasures did he gather in this insane duration and without contest from anyone else? Chapter 998 The Ancestral Scales. As we have assumed, the ancestor really kept him in due to his masters. An official spoke telepathically. But, it still doesn't make sense that he was kept for a century. We won't know for certain unless we asked the ancestor personally. Clan head Kirsoon said. Since there was nothing binding Felix to tell the complete truth, anything he said was taken with a grain of salt by them. I am just glad you have returned. Clan head Kirsoon lowered the tension with a soft tone. Thank you, Elder. Felix nodded in appreciation. As for our deal, we naturally won't pull the rag on you. Clan head Kirsoon waved his hand and beamed a giant white chest that was donned with pink shimmering crystals. Felix raised an eyebrow in surprise at the size of the chest, not expecting to be bigger than a bus. Looks like they found the ancestor's corpse while he was in his enlarged size. Asna said. Open it. Clan head Kirsoon requested. Without delay, Felix flew towards the chest's handle and unlocked it with a single push. Immediately after, he was forced to close his eyes shut after they got hit by blinding golden flash. The other dragons were also forced to squint their eyes at the shimmering golden light. After Felix's eyes got accustomed to it, he unlocked them slightly and stared at the content of the chest. Are those scales or gold plates? Felix was left dazed at the appearance of the ancestral scales. They truly resembled wide thick plates made entirely out of gold. There were exactly 20 of them stacked above each other akin to a Pringles chips. Unlike other dragons, Ancestor Ymir was the only one with golden shimmering scales, making him stand out among even an army of dragons. The frail image of him and his grey dyed-out scales within the dimensional pocket shouldn't be taken as a reference. Satisfied? Clan head Kirsoon asked while showing a bitter expression. Yes. Seeing that all the surrounding dragons had negative expressions, Felix swiftly closed the chest and beamed it in his spatial card before they changed their decision. He could see that most of them weren't pleased with themselves by taking this deal. Sure, it helped them secure the victory for their clan, but the price was selling the remains of their own ancestor. It was doubtful if they could ever forgive themselves. As we have signed, the public must never know about our deal. Clan head Kirsoon warned Felix with a stern look. It was one thing for them to feel shitty about it and for everyone else to know about their deal. If it went public, they would receive the biggest backlash ever from their race, and it might even cause them to get punished heavily by the Elder Dragon. You have my word. Felix assured them with a firm tone. Seeing that Felix was taking this matter seriously had put some officials' minds a bit at ease. Let's change the subject. The less we talk about it the better. Clan head Kirsoon rubbed his chin before asking Felix, be honest, you must have picked many bloodline treasures in your prolonged stay. We know that the ancestor is generous and will allow you to run free. I did pick some, but they weren't my priority. Felix replied calmly while beaming 30 royal gemstones on the table. So many. Oh God! Jackpot! Everyone around stopped moping at once about their ancestral scales and got hyped up. 30 royal gemstones was a large figure that had never been gathered by any team for a very long time. After all, the royal gemstones belonged to ancient dragon corpses, making them a finite resource. With each cycle, the harvest get less and less. I am registering this as my own share in the team pool. Felix disclosed. Of course, of course. Clan head Kirsoon and the others were beyond ecstatic to do so as it implied that the White Clan would be getting the larger portion. That's because Forgo was dead, leaving only white dragons and Felix in the pool. Felix would be getting an extra 2.5% to his 30% of shares in the pool due to Forgo's death. It might seem like a lot, but the White clan would still be getting 67.5% of the pool, which was now much bigger due to Felix's insane contribution. As a comparison, Anastasia, Tando, and Kemd had contributed a measly 4 to 5 bloodline treasures each. Dragon Slayer, how about you consider selling your shares of the pool to us? An official promised, we will give you a generous price. I don't think so. Felix shook his head, I am going to auction my portion to everyone interested in the next couple of days. Before the officials could get upset and displeased, Felix carried on with a smile, but, I will give you a special 10% discount for anything you buy in the auction due to our friendly relations. This was enough to settle their raising displeasure. Sure, it wasn't the best option, but at least they would be saving 10% of their resources with each purchase, unlike the other clans. This would help them get a few more royal gemstones. Looks like no one doubted the legitimacy of your provided amount. Asna commentated. I already told you, they are confident that Queen Ai would rat me out if I decided to hide more royal gemstones. Felix smirked mentally. Based on the contract he signed, any royal gemstone he found must be placed in the pool. In the officials' minds, the moment Felix had exited the dimensional pocket, the Queen Ai would have checked his inventory to see how much he possessed. Since she said nothing after he handed out this amount, they assumed that he had shown everything, especially, when the amount displayed was massive. But in reality, Felix had given the royal gemstones to Mistress Candace while he was in the dimensional pocket. Because there was no connection to the network, Queen Ai had no idea about this transaction. When exactly are you preparing this auction? And what kind of currency will be used? One of the officials asked, is it really going to be purely natural treasures? I will hold the auction in 2 days in the evening. Felix answered, as for the currency, I would prefer B-grade and natural treasures or unique treasures. Although Felix would have rather kept those royal bloodlines to himself, he knew that would have arisen some suspicion, especially, when he had already published his interest in holding the auction and his lack of desire for the bloodline treasures. Still, it wasn't as bad as he would be refilling his empty natural treasures inventory. All right, we will be prepared. I will excuse myself. Felix nodded respectfully and turned around, wanting to return to his room. However, before he could go further, clan head Kir soon informed from afar, by the way, don't go anywhere for the next week or so. Elder Dragon will be summoning you. Why? Felix frowned. What else? Must be to talk about your prolonged stay in the dimensional pocket. I see. Felix nodded slightly, I am honored to be invited by him. Then, he turned around and exited the courtroom with a gloomy expression. Honored my ass. He wanted to avoid meeting the Elder Dragon anytime soon, especially after everything he heard from Ancestor Ymir. Felix knew that it would be more difficult to lie or hide the truth from him if he dug deeper. I barely spent 10 minutes outside and troubles are already brewing. Felix sighed while flying towards Princess Anastasia's house. Chapter 999 Making an example of them. However, after he reached there, he saw neither Anastasia nor Selfie, only Isa napping on his stomach like a pig. He really likes to sleep. Felix chuckled and went to knock on his head. Isa opened his eye lazily and turned to look at Felix. Immediately, his expression stiffened in shock, not daring to believe that his idol was before him. Dragon Slayer. You made it out alive. I knew it. I knew it. Abruptly, Isa started jumping around in excitement. If I was that easy to kill, you won't be my fan. Felix smiled, tell me, where is your sister and Selfie? Sister has gone out rushing a few minutes earlier. Isa answered with stars in his eyes, as for big sis Selfie, she has returned to her home months ago. Selfie left. Felix was a bit taken back by the news. He firmly believed that she would be waiting for him to get out. After all, he had already informed her that he was fine inside. We don't understand why she left either. Isa shrugged his shoulders, she just packed up and left. I see. Felix patted easy and said, you can return to your sleep now. I will be resting in my room. While Felix was flying towards his room, he checked his messages, knowing that Selfie wouldn't do such a thing unless something must have happened. As her friend, he was worried about her. Though, when he read her message, his worries were pacified. She told him that she had been summoned by her mother and that she would be in closed training to focus more on her runes mastery. She also promised him that when they meet again, he would see another version of her. Looks like Yggdrasil has used your training to motivate her daughter. Lady Sphinx smiled faintly. What do you mean? Felix wondered. Lady Sphinx disclosed about her secret interaction with Lady Yggdrasil that caused Selfie to finally start taking her training seriously instead of chasing after Felix's skirt. Damn, I was already incapable of defeating her while I had void domain. Felix gulped a mouthful. Felix understood that even with his current strength, he was incapable of defeating or even laying a finger on Selfie. As a time elementalist, she was simply untouchable since time was capable of countering every other element besides void element. Since Felix had lost all of his void abilities besides his immunity, he recognized that Selfie could play with him to death if he ever decided to fight her fair and square. If dirty play were involved, the outcome would have been much different. Good thing there is no race with time manipulation. Felix smiled wryly, we would have been dominated in the games left and right. Felix knew that there was a time element primogenitor, and he was still alive. Though, he was much more reclusive than even creation primogenitor. In fact, he was told by Lady Sphinx that most primogenitors had never actually met him in real life. Soon, Felix wrote back a letter to Selfie, wishing her all the best of luck in her training. In addition, he informed her that he would be paying the 9 Elvish realms a visit very soon. After Felix entered his room, he checked the other important messages. The ones at the top were related to the Federation. Looks like some worms started getting antsy while I am gone. Felix smiled coldly while reading Madame Zazia and Maganda Chief's messages. Most of them were reports on problems and issues arising due to some backgrounds not doing their part to complete his agendas. The others were related to the Bardo Empire fighting back against their poaching attempts. Tisk, it only took a year of absence and some rumors for them to stop fearing you and bare their greedy teeth. Asna snickered, you need to make an example out of them, so no one would dare step out of line even if you disappeared for centuries. That's precisely what I intend to do. Felix nodded. Without further ado, Felix took a seat and started recording himself with a composed expression. This is Felix speaking. Firstly, good job to everyone with big investments on the Federation's development. Your passion and loyalty won't go rewardless. However, just like there are faithfuls and loyal allies, there are also some bad sheep, who are holding us back and keep creating big messes for their own profit. Felix switched instantly to an icy cold scary expression before threatening, for those backgrounds, you will be taught a great lesson today, a lesson that will remind you that the shenanigans you used to pull aren't acceptable in the Federation whatsoever. Felix waved his hand, bringing 2 holographic lists in front of the camera. One of them was displaying many benefits that would assist any background within the Federation, such as reduced taxes for the upcoming decade on their commercial trades, promotion to higher position within the Federation, expansion to their territories and such. As for the other list, it was filled with nothing but dreadful penalties that would make any leader's face turn green. A couple of them were heavy increased taxes on all the deals, locking some universal trades paths for them, taking away some of their voting power, immediate replacement of their leaders, reduction of their armies, and more. I already have a list of all the misbehaving backgrounds that deserve either some or most of the penalties in this. Felix threatened calmly, if any one of you doesn't accept all penalties peacefully, I will pay you a special visit and help you sign on them personally. Send to Zazia. Felix sent the video recording and the 2 lists to Madame Zazia with a message, telling her to set up a council meeting and play this recording for everyone. If troubles arose because of the heavy penalties, then she could call him to settle it down. What about the other empire? Asna wondered, shouldn't you take advantage of their aggression and unite the galaxy or something? Not now. Felix shook his head, some competition and friction is better for development. In Felix's eyes, uniting the human race without any enemy would merely cause them to turn against each other within the Federation. This in turn would make them fall apart or at least turn corrupt to the bone. He was too busy to bother babysitting the human race and making sure that no one caused problems. So, he kept the galaxy divided even though he could easily unite the entire galaxy years ago with his army. If things got out of hand between the two superpowers, he could then intervene and unite them. How cruel, I love it. Madame Zazia grinned happily after receiving Felix's response. She knew that he was going to make them pay hell for causing trouble, but she still underestimated Felix's brutality. I can't wait to see their expression turn green in the council. Without further ado, Zazia called in for an emergency meeting that enforced all leaders to participate regardless of what. In 5 minutes, the circular council hall was packed with hundreds of leaders from different areas of the galaxy. It was clear that the Federation had expanded heavily. Madame Zazia, Maganda Chief, and the other 3 original members of the Anti-Royalite Alliance were still the presidential power of Federation due to their voting power being the biggest. What's the emergency? I had to log in amidst an important deal with natives sitting on elemental mines. It better be something important. Indeed, calling us like this is just unacceptable. Before Zazia could even open her mouth, some leaders were already expressing their displeasure and low-key making threats. It was crystal clear that Zazia didn't have respect of everyone here, and with Felix's absence, they grew bolder and disrespectful in dealing with her. Sir Felix has exited the dimensional pocket and have a message for us. Zazia eyed them coldly, is that important enough for you? Chapter 1000 Holding a private auction. Just like they heard the grimmest news in their lives, those troublemakers' faces went as pale as a white sheet. He is alive, he is still alive. How? The hell? I got intel from legit sources that he must have died inside the dimensional pocket. While confusion and fear was setting in their minds and hearts, the majority of leaders had the exact opposite reaction. Relief and happiness were seen in their faces as none of them wanted Felix to die so soon. They knew that he was the lifeline of their existence and the beneficiary within the Federation. If he was gone, no one would have their backs when the bigger backgrounds start to abuse them. Pay attention, please. Without hesitation, Madame Zazia turned on the video recording on the big screen, forcing everyone to focus on it. It didn't take even 2 minutes before the video recording of Felix ended, yet, those 2 minutes had changed the fate of many backgrounds in the Federation forever. If your nation has been mentioned in one of the lists, those changes will be implemented effective immediately. Madame Zazia announced with a hidden delighted smirk as she eyed the stunned looks of the troublesome leaders, who had been hit with the heaviest penalties. Before they could even open their mouths to argue and defend themselves, Madame Zazia stated, if you don't accept any of those penalties, Mr. Felix will personally pay you a visit to convince you. You all know how fast he can travel through the cosmos. Upon hearing so, the punished leaders felt their words got stuck in their throats. They wanted to object, yell, curse, and even threaten the Federation. Alas, the horrific image of Felix and his army was installed in their minds, making them never cross the line of no return. They got what they deserve. Damn, they got massacred simply due to making a couple of troubles. I should never cross that monster. Thank God I was in closed training for the past year, I would have been in their place. The other leaders had different reactions to the heavy penalties imposed on their allies. Some were gratified and felt protected, some were alarmed. Whatever their reaction was, all of them were clear about one thing. Unless they were 100% certain that Felix was dead, they should never threaten the stability of the Federation to earn extra profits. 2 days later, back in the Icarius galaxy. The news about Felix's return had gone viral on a universal scale due to his video recording getting leaked before the council meeting could even end. While Felix's fans were relieved, the royal dragons had much drastic reaction. All of them had their eyes turn red with greed and envy at the thought that Felix had spent an entire century within their treasure land. They couldn't imagine the amount of royal gemstones he had collected. Before this could get even messy and chaotic, the White Clan had come out with a statement that cleared out Felix of all troubles. They simply shared the amount of royal gemstones he collected and that he would be holding a public auction for his portion within the UVR for anyone interested. When everyone saw that Felix was going to be selling more than 16 pieces of royal gemstones, no one cared any more about details of his stay and started rallying to obtain as many natural treasures as possible. Even the red dragons were planning to snatch at least one royal gemstone. While was everyone focused on the royal gemstones, Prince Domino had his eyes only on Felix after the news came out. In fact, he started his journey towards the White Clan the instant he heard that Felix was staying there. Finally, I can prove my worth again. Prince Domino narrowed his eyes dangerously as he pierced through the clouds at his fastest speed. The past year had gone terribly for him as he had lost the respect of his entire clan. The dragons were simple creatures. If you were undefeated and on the rise, they would worship your strength. However, the instant you lose a single time, the level of respect and worship disappear, making you get treated just like any other royal dragon. Although Prince Domino refused to accept the way he lost, everyone else thought otherwise. Nothing he said could change this fact, only actions. Is everything set properly? Felix asked Malik while walking inside a gorgeous ancient auditorium with more than 10,000 seats. At the top, there were cubicles for VIP guests, such as the 4 clan heads and their officials. There was an even higher seat prepared specifically for Elder Dragon in case he desired to participate. Though, Felix knew that was highly unlikely as 16 royal gemstones wouldn't make him even bat an eyelid with the amount he had consumed over his lifespan. Yes, we can allow the guests to enter any time. Malik nodded while wearing a breathtaking blue dress, black heels, and light makeup, making her seem dressed for a party. As the host of this private auction, she naturally had to dress beautifully to attract the eyes even though all the attendants would be dragons. Begin sending the invitation links based on the dragon's proper hierarchy. Felix stressed, knowing that it would be upsetting and disrespectful for royal dragons to attend earlier than red dragons. I will make sure of it. Malik assured with a serious tone. It didn't take even half a minute before the entire bottom row of the auditorium to be packed to the brim with humanoid red dragons. All of them were normal red dragons, taking advantage of the UVR and picking a humanoid form to access the auction. Since it was impossible to have every single red dragon participating in the auction, Felix had limited the number to 5,000 and established a rule that allowed only red dragons with the highest amount of natural treasures to attend. With Queen Ai help, it was easier to get it done. Next, the 4 clan royal dragons sat on a seating row that was divided from the red dragons area and a bit higher than them. Because the royal dragons' numbers were in the thousands, everyone interested could attend the auction without any requirements. After they attended, they were followed by the officials, and then the clan heads. Felix waited for a few minutes for the elder dragon. After he didn't turn up, he requested from Malik to start the auction immediately. Good evening everyone. Malik smiled charmingly as she stepped on stage while having a holographic screen behind her. When she saw thousands of eyes from dragons capable of shredding her apart, she got slightly nervous. However, her nervousness soon gone away after the image of Felix brutalizing those same dragons had surfaced in her mind. Today, we have 16 bloodline treasures of various sizes and colors for sale. Malik disclosed straight to the point, knowing that dragons weren't here to get entertained. Bring out the first bloodline treasure. Malik clapped her hands and 2 cute little elves showed up on the stage, pushing a cart that was carrying a cubical glass container. A red hexagon-shaped royal gemstone was placed in the center of the glass container, capturing the eyes of every dragon. It's massive. Oh Lord, if I bought this, I can grow at least 10 meters. What a fine piece, this is just the beginning of the auction. Even the clan heads had their expression turn more serious, knowing that such a big royal gemstone must be secured by them. In fact, they already came to an agreement that not a single royal gemstone must leave the hands of the royal family. That's because the red dragons were still clueless that bloodline treasures were just royal gemstones in disguise. The royal family couldn't afford such news going public, as it would make the red dragons greed for royal dragons' gemstones for their own advancement. In addition, this would make it impossible for the royal family to harvest any more royal gemstones from the dead. The starting price is 100 grade B natural treasures or other treasures of equal value. Malik eyed everyone and hit the gavel on the podium loudly. You may begin. Unlike her enthusiasm, the dragons kept bidding higher and higher without letting out a single word. All of them had invisible holographic screens before them to be used as bidding tablets. Meanwhile, Malik had a hologram to the side, showing her all the bids and the current price for the royal gemstone. Dear Lord, how can they be this filthy rich? Malik felt poorer each second she saw a new bid getting placed. Who could blame her? The starting price was 100 B-graded natural treasures. In less than 30 seconds, it had reached 1000 B-graded natural treasures. Good, 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 keep bidding to make sure that your secret doesn't get out. In the corner of the auditorium, Felix was watching his pocket getting filled with a creepy wide grin. The auction was merely his first step. Felix planned to dry every single dragon here from their natural treasures before he leaves the galaxy. If he didn't do so, he wouldn't be called Felix.